Listen, I pride myself on my punctuality. It is 1 minute after 1 o'clock in the afternoon here on the Pacific Coast. My name is Kip Davis. I'm a scholar of Hebrew Bible and early Judaism. I am joined by my lovely and very capable producer, Vishanti. And it's Thursday, the 9th of January. Today's the day that my mortgage payment comes out every month on the 9th. So I got to do something, right? Hey, dude, what the hell? You're supposed to be teaching a class. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe Joel actually took my advice. I suggested to him he might as well just turn the stream on because no one will be listening to him anyways. It's not like he's got anything worthwhile to say. Do you, Joel? Do your students need to hear what you have to tell them? I mean, I guess if they want to pass, probably. So yeah. So here we are, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Vish. How are you?
Well, I'm grateful that I'm not currently on fire. I'm far away from the LA fires, which I'm glad for, but several of my friends and comrades locally have had to evacuate. At least one of them lost their home. So we're
Terrible.
organizing mutual aid and trying to get people resources and things like that. So if any of your viewers happen to be in LA County and they have been displaced by the fires, please call 211 because a lot of places have been coordinating for temporary housing at no expense for at least a week. So
Wow. Yeah, that's terrible. That's awful. And I think I'll just say too. I know there are aid if you're not anywhere near California, and you want to help and you're able to do so. There are aid organizations that are actively accepting donations and cash and yeah. So it's important as the world burns that we rally and help each other out. Wow, it's good to see a bunch of friends here. I hope everyone had a terrific holiday. Happy to see Nitty's here, Satan's here, Vadim is here, and Vadim, there is no snow out here on the west coast of my home and native land. Tomer, the native Israeli bot, is here. Hank Fishy, one of my favorite and long-suffering patrons, is here. Lawrence is here, but he's not listening, so that's fine. Emergency Moto, good to see you. Simone, it's always a pleasure that you're here. This dude, are we? I didn't see. Are we what? Are we? I missed it. Sorry, man.
are we?
Old friend of the channel that I haven't seen around in ages, Swift Sea. I am happy you were able to come out, and no, this time it's not your fault. I don't know how deep into the channel lore you go here, Vish, but the very first time I ever talked about Deuteronomy 32, actually, it wasn't the very first time, but it was one of the first times I ever talked about Deuteronomy 32 on YouTube. It was actually Swift C's fault. And he had a hard time living that down. So, yeah. Triceratops says you should just click.
If your friends are disabled and you need evac assistance, accessible housing, direct them to your local independent living center. Yeah, there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of ranches here, people with horses and livestock. So there's lots of shelters that have been opening up for people and their animals.
Oh, this is sad though too. I sure hope you get the job, but that's sad that you will have less time to do meaningless, pointless things like this. Captain Dadpool, it's good to see you. Everyone, oh hey, Maya, it's always a pleasure. Godless Granny is here, you guys, which is super cool. Thank you, everyone. Come on, Tomer. Stop.
There's like a bot.
And why? Why am I calling you a bot? Really? Are you serious? Come on. You know better than that by now, don't you? Chrissy Hansen, it's great that you are out to check this to watch the stream. I hope
One of my
to
favorite people.
receive a stamp, an official stamp of approval from
Chrissy is
Chrissy
so
H.
smart, y'all. Like, it's
So
not even fair.
and guys, like I've read a lot on Deuteronomy 32, and like this is not an exaggeration. Some of the best stuff that I've read has come from Chrissy Hansen's publications. Can you I gotta do something for just 1 second, Vish, if you want to just continue this hold.
Oh, yeah, I was talking to Chrissy like a day or two ago, and we just were riffing on various, textual things that we had been reading, and just the casual comments about the text that Chrissy will say that are just mind-blowing insights to me. Like, I was sitting there in a Discord call, literally taking notes while I'm talking to Chrissy because I'm getting such good scholarship just casually. It was really fun. So I don't want to overstate it, but I literally learn something new every time I talk to Chrissy. So super mega props.
Mega props, Chrissy. Sorry, my son ordered a box of cereal from Amazon, which is not something I've ever done before. And wondered if the stamp on it was he couldn't figure out if the best before date was 2025 or 2016. But it's cereal, right? Like, I don't know. What's gonna happen to you?
It'll go a
It's
little
so good,
stale.
right? It just tastes really terrible, and you'll notice. I think you'll notice. Well, we should probably. We've been prattling on here for almost 10 minutes already. We should but because there's a lot to do, guys. We should get into what's happening today. So, I am a serial killer. Sorry, I'm super distracted by the chat, and I shouldn't be. I'm doing something today that I feel like I like doing these kinds of things. I feel like I haven't done a lot recently. Um, so we're going to be looking at clips from a video by Inspiring Philosophy and his special guest, Dr. Joel Carrico. And they're talking about, I believe the name of the video is the pagan origins of Yahweh debunked or something to that effect. And they spend a good deal of their time talking about a really important passage in Deuteronomy 32 that I have some familiarity with. So I thought today that I would put this stream together talking about maybe less so the origins of Yahweh, but more so talking about the presentation of Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible from a perspective of development, in view of his very early stages as part of a divine council, as a member of the court of El, and how and why that developed into a stronger, I guess you could call it, monolatrous picture, henotheistic picture, maybe a monotheistic picture, but I hesitate with those sorts of words, and we'll see why. But the picture as it's presented throughout the entire Hebrew Bible is incredibly complex, which is part of what makes this topic so fun, but also part of why it's so difficult to teach. So what's going to be happening today, and because I feel like I've got a pretty decent pulse on my audience. I know that you guys show up and watch what I have to say because you like to learn. You like to learn at a pretty high level. So I'm not about to insult your intelligence. We're going to be doing a lot of reading today. And I apologize for that a little bit at the outset, but I also think too that most of you probably don't mind so much. If you're here, you probably like to read, you like to learn. So
Or listen to other
that's
people read.
or listen to other people read. But you're gonna get your chance to actually read out. We'll be putting pages of text on the screen
Yes.
for you
Thank
to
God.
see yourself. But
Thank you. That is such an
yeah,
accessibility thing for me. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
I totally get that. It's like that for me too. And what I've decided, what I'm trying to do more so, what I think I like to do, instead of just cutting citations of text that I want to cite out of a book and pasting it into a slide, what I've started to do more so is actually just throw the page of the book on the screen and read it. Um, it might be a little bit more difficult to see or to follow, but I think it helps to provide a stronger sense of context. Um, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can, so uh, pages of a text. Yes.
Scholar.
Well, listen, um, Chrissy, uh, what do I say? I'm sorry that kind of threw me off. And yeah, I expect that in the coming couple of weeks, I'll have to say some things about West Huff's handling of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even just like basic shit, you guys. Like, you know, the sorts of things that an ABD PhD should know better. Do you know
You
what
know
that
my
means?
thoughts on
Everybody
all
know
that.
what that is? ABD? Is that a term we're familiar with? Um,
Just in case, you should definitely explain for
I
the
should explain. So
benefit of the
ABD
audience.
is all but dissertation. So when a PhD candidate has passed through their comps, and has had their dissertation topic approved, and they start writing, they become an ABD. So Wes is an ABD. He's always be doodling.
Always
um,
be
Wes
doodling.
Wes is an ABD. He's as I understand it from what he's told me, he thinks he's like 4, 5, 6 months out of finishing. So, but and I'm anxious and I'm eager to see what happens, what he produces. So, yeah, so we're gonna watch this video. I'm gonna have a lot to say about it. I encourage everyone, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Super chat your questions to get them in, because I'm not going to have any time to track the chat. Vishanti will be doing her best, but she's kind of running the show here, so it makes things difficult. Um, and we will, as those come in, we'll take a look at them. And do you want to just kind of go over the chat rules here before we start, Vish?
Yeah, just some like community norms, I guess. We're not here to proselytize. We're just here to learn, and if you disagree, that's fine, but we're not here to proselytize or try to convert people to your religion or out of a religion. And please, no trolling. Like, if you don't want to be here, just close the tab. And I usually call it esoteric quackery. If you're just gonna start riffing on like how mushrooms are Jesus, like just go to Ammon channel. This is not really the venue for that. So, like, if you want to be a
As
mystic, good. Just live your best life. But this side chat is not the venue for that.
It's not
Yeah.
the place, guys.
It just brings the vibe of the whole thing down. So
It sure does. All right. So, we're gonna start. We're gonna watch clips. We're gonna intersperse those with some slides that I have put together, and we'll see how long this takes. But it could take a little while. So,
okay.
no promises, everyone.
All right.
Thank you for coming, everyone. So what are we doing today? As you all know, there's a common argument that we see online all the time that Yahweh was originally a pagan deity, or he was part of a polytheistic pantheon. We know a lot of this is obviously the case. It's always asserted as if it's like a fact. And the obvious response that we need to do as Christians, or as anyone with common sense who's read the Bible, I mean, honestly, is to go, yes, you're right. Yes, Yahweh wasn't part of a pantheon. You know why? Because the biblical authors keep condemning Israel over and over and over for syncretism, for saying that, hey, you should be worshiping God alone. Stop worshiping these other gods like Asherah and Anat and Baal besides Yahweh. So the obvious response Christians should give is go, yeah, we know. But that doesn't change the fact that there was a group of Israelites that were early on who were arguing, no, there's only one God. You should only worship this one, Yahweh. That's it. That's all it should be. End of story. So we're going to review a video tonight that's trying to make the case that no, what actually happened is everyone originally thought Yahweh was part of this polytheistic pantheon, and then he slowly evolved into the monotheistic religion. I don't see a lot of good evidence for that. In fact, our earliest texts that talk about Yahweh that are in the biblical corpus, like Numbers 23, for example, suggest that he was always seen as like a high creator deity, and he was worshipped alone by a group in Israel, even though others, as the biblical authors tell us, came along and said, no, we're going to syncretize. We're going to add this kind of stuff in. We're going to worship Yahweh alongside other gods. I mean, we see this in the incident with the golden calf, in Judges, in 1 Samuel, as well as throughout the divided monarchy, and so on and so on. So there's this constant push and pull. And so what I'm going to basically be arguing is like, that's not what the biblical texts are saying. The biblical texts are clearly saying that Yahweh should be worshipped alone. He's the only God worthy of worship. He's the only creator. He was not, I will disagree, and I don't think there's any good evidence. Yahweh was seen as a lesser deity, as a son of El, as like a storm deity, and he later on he became seen as the high deity. So that's what we're going to be getting into. So I'll get to some super chats here, and then I'll open up the video and we'll get into that. So
all right. Oh, wow. You know, the first problem with this, guys, I don't know if you know, but the first problem with
univocal voice.
did you catch that?
Univocal voice.
Yeah. So as my good friend and fellow Diablo critic, Dr. Dan McClellan likes to remind us all, the Bible is not univocal. The Bible is not univocal, everyone. The Bible is a collection of really varied pieces of theological, religious, political, cultural literature from a relatively wide range of time among a group or groups of people who went through their own dramatic cultural shifts and experiences, which shaped the ways in which these texts were put together, edited, and reconstituted and reinterpreted. So right at the outset, now it's silly to me that anyone would suggest that Yahweh isn't a storm deity. He rides on the clouds. He sends and he withholds the rain. He hurls lightning bolts to defeat his enemies. Guys, that's what storm gods did. It's what they did. I don't see the problem here. But this is just the start of it. I think the reason why, maybe the reason why Michael struggles to see any evidence for The more complicated history of the God Yahweh in the biblical text is perhaps because
Happen to be a little bit of an armchair expert on the subject, if I do say so myself.
maybe, just maybe, he's not approaching the text in a sophisticated enough manner or fashion. Just maybe he's not reading the texts in their original languages and with a clear grasp and understanding of the historical cultural background of this literature and the broader literature
Yeah.
of the ancient Near East.
This is something like, of course, he doesn't see it because if the idea and the type of God
Yeah.
that this one was changed over time, he probably feels that like delegitimizes his practice or his theology. So he's disincentivized from seeing it that way.
He certainly is. I think you're totally correct about that. You recall he mentioned, I want everyone to remember this because we're coming back to this. We're going to spend most of our time talking about Deuteronomy 32, but this text really does need to be discussed in conversation with a number of other texts from the Hebrew Bible that we'll look at quickly. Now, notice that he also he did bring up early texts from Numbers chapter 23 and how these promote the exclusive worship of Yahweh as a high creation deity. I'm just gonna let's just keep that in mind. Okay, we're going to come back to that. But I think we what do I have here on my, I need to pull up my outline again. Sorry. Already doing such a great job. Okay, what do I have next? I've got another clip. We're gonna look at this next clip first, and then we're going to talk about a text.
Don't doubt that at all. However, it does not mean that is always the case, because that is not true.
All right, let's continue on. I think I just want to play one more section here, and then we will close this out. Well, we'll get
traces of these
sorry, I mean we will get to
Yeah.
super chats. We're not going to close it out. I promise I'll get to
Good.
your super chats.
All right, this is
past
good.
polytheistic beliefs are also found in the Bible itself. In several passages, El is described as being the leader in a council of gods. These quotes seem to stem from a time before Judaism became monotheistic. For instance, we read, "For who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, El is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him." And also, Elohim, also containing El, presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods.
Just a quick note: this is not a problem for biblical theology. If you read Michael Heiser, like the divine council, yeah.
I guess okay. Yeah, let's stop there. So this first text, Vishanti, can you bring up the slideshow? This first text that this gentleman cited is Psalm 89. And it's a fairly important one. It's a really interesting one. So just click onto the next one so we can look at the text. Here's my translation of this psalm. The skies praise your wonders, Yahweh. Also, your faithfulness in the council of the Kiddushim. This is the Bekochel Kiddushim. This particular word I've left untranslated. It generally means holy ones, but very, very often throughout the Hebrew Bible, going deep into the Second Temple period, we see this a lot in the Qumran scrolls. This word is very commonly used of divine beings, of gods, of cosmic figures. So your faithfulness, Yahweh, in the council of the Kiddushim, the holy ones, the divine beings, who in the cloud cover will face off against Yahweh, is like Yahweh among who? The Bivnei Elim, the sons of the gods. And this is the plural instance here. Friends, this isn't even just the son of God. This is the sons of the gods. El is greatly dreaded in the close council of the Kedoshim and feared by all who surround him. Yahweh is the God of armies, the Elohei Tsabaot. Who is like you, strong Yah? Your faithfulness surrounds you. So I want to point out a couple of important things here right away. I hope everybody sees a number of these very critical key terms. We have the name Yahweh repeated throughout this psalm, which is delivered to Yahweh, extolling his greatness, but importantly, extolling his greatness in this council of Kedoshim, the council of the holy ones. When it says that who is like Yahweh among the sons of the gods, it's assuming that Yahweh is a part of this group. The preposition there is the preposition bet, which requires some inclusion most of the time. That's what it means in this particular instance. You'll notice that there's a distinction made here between Yahweh and between El, and we know of El, the high god of Canaanite pantheons, from numerous texts discovered at Ugarit. El makes frequent appearances throughout the biblical text as well. But I think I want you to look at this, friends, and I want you to see clearly that it's subtle, but there is a distinction here. El is not Yahweh in this poem, in this psalm. El is the one who's greatly dreaded in the close council of the Kedoshim, feared by all who surround him. In this next line here, something else I want to point out that's not going to come out in the English, but is particular to the Hebrew, and we're going to be coming back to this point a few more times as we go forward in today's stream. Yahweh is the God of armies, Elohei Tsabaot. This is employing, this is a construct using the plural noun Elohim along with the plural noun Sabaot, which generally means armies. Yahweh Tsabaot is most commonly translated as the Lord of Hosts in a lot of English translations of the Old Testament. Here, I think it's significant that Yahweh is identified as an Elohim. And I think in this particular poem, this helps to make that separation between who he is and who El is in this council. This is part of what provides for his inclusion among the B'nai Elim, the sons of the gods. So this is our starting place. Enclitic, yes. Thank you. That's useful. Thanks, Chrissy. Sorry, that threw me off. But yeah, Chrissy's right. This is not properly plural. This is enclitic. So the overall picture that I want to provide for you is one that is repeated on a regular basis throughout the Bible, and that's Yahweh's presence in this divine council. And in this particular instance, I'm going to forward the argument that this is not his divine council. This is the court of El, the high god of the Canaanite pantheon. Let's take a look at what Michael has to say. I think in the next clip about this.
Yeah, as in biblical texts. It's never interpreted, though, according to biblical authors, as if God needs a council to help him make decisions. The council is there because God is a relational being. He desires to have relationships with beings. It's not like Michael Heiser points out, the council in the biblical text is not like the council at Ugarit, where like the gods have to fight or decide because they're all like impotent in different ways. The council in the biblical text never presents Yahweh as anything other than the high creator deity.
Hold on, can you pause it? Can you pause it there for a second, Vish? And I need to ask you a question if you can come up onto the stage. So Michael just said that this is different from what we see in the Canaanite pantheon and the Council of El at Ugarit, where the gods are fighting with each other. What did it say? Do you remember what it said there in the third line of this is probably not fair, but in the third line of the psalm, it said Yahweh faces off against the sons of Elim. Now, what do you think is going on there? Are they playing hockey?
Maybe they're playing Scrabble. I don't know. I wasn't there.
No. This is clearly combat language. Like this is a fiercely fought contest that's being described here. So and we'll talk about Michael Heiser in just a minute. I hope everyone just keeps that in the back of their head for the moment. Michael just said, according to Michael Heiser, God has a divine counsel, not because he needs it, no, but just because he's such a relational being. He desires to have relationships with other creatures, so he makes them, right? But let's watch this, and then we'll talk about the next text, and I will talk a little bit about Mike Heiser.
Okay.
Also a verse in which we read that El, here seen as a god of the entire earth, divided up the nations of the world among his sons, giving Israel to his son Yahweh. So here El and Yahweh have not yet fused into the same God. We read, when Elyon allotted the nations for inheritance, when he divided up humanity, he fixed the boundaries for people, according to the number of divine sons. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his own inheritance.
All right, so
I actually think we're a little bit ahead, but that's okay. We'll catch up. So let's the second text that he put up there, and I'm sorry, I should have stopped this earlier. Is Psalm 82. Do you want to bring that up, Vish? And I want to point out a couple of really interesting things about this passage. Let's look at this. All right. God stands in the council of El. That's Ba'adat El. Notice what the word is here used to refer to God. This is Elohim, and this is important. And we're going to pay attention to the recurrence of this word in this psalm. So God, Elohim, stands in the council of El, Ba'adat El, the Canaanite high god. In the midst of gods, Elohim, he pronounces justice. Now, in this case, in this instance, in the second line, we know that this is plural because you can't stand in the midst of, a single being. It has to be plural. In the first instance, we know that's singular because the verb that is modifying it is also singular. So a singular God stands in the council of El. In the midst of the gods, he pronounces justice. And this is what this God has to say. How long will you judge dishonestly? And you lift up the face of the wicked. Salah. Judge the wretched and the orphan, the needy and the poor, put to rights, rescue the wretched and the needy from the hand of wicked men, deliver. They do not understand. They do not know. They wander about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth shake. This God continues, I myself have said, you are gods. Again, using this word, Elohim Atem. Sons of Elyon, Uvne Elyon, the lot of you. However, like a man you shall die. As one of the chiefs, you shall fall. And that's the end of what this God says. And so the psalmist, in response to this, cries out, "Rise up, Elohim, rise up, God, judge the earth, for you will inherit all the nations." Now, some things to point out here, which are really important, is this God, this Elohim, is standing in the council of El. Who is this? He's not named, but he's clearly not El, and he's also not one of these other gods of the nations whom he is condemning and indicting with his speech. This is universally, as far as I'm aware, almost universally understood to be Yahweh, and in you know, an anonymized version of Yahweh. He's not named, but he's clearly the one who's taking a stand in the council and indicting the remaining gods, the sons of Elyon, the members of the council of El. And yeah, this is an excellent point, Chrissy. Yah is literally Hasatan in this passage. He's literally the adversary. He's taking on the role of the crown prosecutor, speaking on behalf of the king in seeking justice. Excellent point. I love it. So good. But it's very difficult to actually read something like Psalm 82 and not see that this polytheistic picture, this picture of multiple divine beings, of Yahweh being presented anonymously as a member of the court of El, of the council of El, but this is not his council. I would say El takes a very passive role, and this is what we tend to see at the earliest stages of the texts of the Hebrew Bible. Most of the Hebrew Bible texts were written already at a point in which El, the Canaanite high god, had faded right into the background, to the point where he doesn't really do anything most of the time. That's what's happening here. El is just overseeing this council. As far as we know, he may not even be present. This is just his council. And Yahweh, anonymously, is taking charge. He's taking control. He's forwarding himself over and above the other deities. He's calling them out and saying, you guys are going to just die like men. At the very end of this passage, it's very interesting that the psalmist says to God, to Yahweh, you will inherit all the nations. So we're going to get into Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9 here, just presently. But this is significant, guys, because what the psalmist is doing is he's expanding the traditional inheritance of Yahweh. The inheritance of Yahweh is his people, Jacob. It's the nation of Israel. What is the psalmist saying here? No, you will inherit all the nations. They're all yours because all the rest of the gods are impotent. They're like dead men. All right. Yes, Gene Soko, those are my translations. So let's talk, let's look at what Michael Heiser has to say. Sorry, I probably should have put some of these in a little bit of a different order. So this is Michael Heiser from His Unseen Realm. And remember the point that Michael was making just before this, how God doesn't need a divine council. He has one because he likes to have people around. He likes to have relationships. He's all about relationships, guys. Well, this is from Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, published in 2015. And this is literally the entire section. Everything that he writes here, answering this question. What does God need with a council? This is an obvious question. Its answer is just as obvious. God doesn't need a council, but it's scripturally clear that he has one. Yes, it is. The question is actually similar to another one. What does God need with people? The answer is the same. God doesn't need people, but he uses them. God is not dependent on humans for his plans. He doesn't need us for evangelism. It's a good thing, because I don't do that stuff. He could save all the people he wanted by merely thinking about it. God could terminate evil in the blink of an eye and bring human history to the end he desires at any moment, but he doesn't. Instead, he works his plan for all things on earth by using human beings. He's also not incomplete without our worship, but he desires it. I'm not saying that the question is whether God needs a council is pointless. I'm saying it's no argument against the existence of a divine council. You got some thoughts there, Vish?
So frustrating. It's just a bunch of theological assertions. And he really isn't doing himself any favors by saying, God could end all the evil in the world, but he just doesn't because of reasons. Like, you're not making him look good there, friend. I don't know why Christians want to die on that hill. Like, if you say, oh man, there's a lot of bad stuff, and the one cosmic entity that has the unilateral power to make it stop instantly just doesn't, why would you question that? Like, come on, that's not helping you out.
Is there a Vishanti, is there a citation in that section?
There aren't any citations in this entire block of text.
None. There are none.
He just asserts that it's obvious that God doesn't need a
God
council.
doesn't need people.
He just asserts it. God doesn't need a council.
God is not dependent on humans for his plans. So
you have to make up explanations like, well, obviously he doesn't need one, but he does have one. And you just start doing the cartwheels. That's very frustrating. That's why this is one of the many reasons I can't take Michael Heiser seriously. Like, I know that a lot of people think that he's just the bee's knees, but as somebody earlier, I starred this because I knew it was gonna come back.
Yep.
Michael, aliens or the Nephilim? Heiser, yeah. Gen Pop 321, I think is his channel that he had put all the wackadoo stuff on, and it's just so frustrating.
Yep. So importantly, I want to point out here that Michael's source for this is doing theology at this point. As you mentioned, he's not actually drawing any of this information from the texts. He is reading the texts and then filling in the margins in places where he has questions and cannot find satisfying answers from the text itself. So, all right. What's next? I have to look at my my notes here again. I think before we do that, if you play the next clip up to 1:20:53, and then we'll start talking about Mark Smith. Oh, actually, Vish, there's a couple of super chats. I wonder if we should just bang those out first before we continue.
Sure.
And people, if you continue to have questions, please just get those in as we go. All right. What do we have here? I gotta look here. Oh, Emergency Moto. Thank you very much for the $10 super chat. Joe Rogan, all y'all, did you see this? My friend Wes Huff managed to get himself a highly coveted appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. what's it called? It's called something like what's his show? It's the Joe Rogan Experience, right? That's what it's called, I think. Yeah, so Joe said he wanted Wes back on with someone who disagrees with him. Any chance you can talk to Wes and make that happen? Dude, I actually did send Wes a text 2 nights ago after I'd watched his podcast. I kind of think if that's something that Joe Rogan wants, I'm your Huckleberry. So
Can you generate a lot of controversy and clicks? Because
I
that's a
don't know.
good
That's the way to get
that's a
it
good
done,
thing for
right?
him to know about.
Yeah, I don't know. Is this enough? Is taking a dump on the great Joel Carrico and
I mean, look, if you can
Mike
get Flint
Jones
Dibble
enough?
on the show to try to answer all the crap that Graham Hancock spews, you might have a chance.
Maybe there's a chance. But thank you very much for the super chat. Listen, if any of you has an in with Joe Rogan, yeah, see if someone can make that happen. Chris, for $2, thank you very much for the super chat. When did Yahweh stop demanding child sacrifice? We have no idea. And by and large, most scholars tend to think that this is a pretty early practice, but this is complicated because a lot of the actual archaeological information we have for child sacrifices that was practiced in the Levant generally comes from Punic colonies around the Mediterranean. I actually think Punic colonies are North African and the rest are Phoenician, but yeah, so Punic and Phoenician sites where child sacrifices were performed, and these run the gamut from I think 9th, 8th century BCE all the way up to the 2nd, maybe even the 1st century BCE, and some of this I think is relatively complicated by looking at and reading some of the things that we'd see among the prophets, in particular, like Jeremiah. If you've seen, if any of you Patreons, any of my patrons have seen the full child sacrifice video, the conversation I had with Dr. Heath Durrell and Dr. Dan McClown, I get into this a little bit, but there's a manuscript in the Dead Sea Scrolls that I have worked extensively on. It's a very, very old copy of the book of Jeremiah. It might date all the way back to the 3rd century. This particular manuscript has a lot of secondary editorial activity in it. And I believe that some of that editorial activity includes what's called the Jeremiah C material. This tends to be understood as the latest material of the editors in their construction of the book of Jeremiah. And a lot of it's very Deuteronomic. The kinds of stuff that were at first absent and then inserted into this particular copy of Jeremiah has to do with worshiping the Baalim, and in particular, offering sacrifices, child sacrifices to the Baalim. Jeremiah, rather famously, just anything he doesn't like, he just says it's Baalim. It doesn't matter what it is. So he's not a reliable source for understanding what Baal worship was, because according to him, if it wasn't just this really, really narrow form of Yahwism, it was Baalism, right? So, but I think a manuscript like this from as late as the late 3rd century should raise some questions about how widespread the practice of child sacrifice was and how far deeply it penetrated into cults of Yahweh, maybe even into the Hellenistic period. We just don't know. But thank you very much for the question. I really appreciate it. All right. Swift C, thank you for the $5 super chat. If the Bible isn't univocal, why does the OT reference itself at times? Doesn't Deuteronomy 32:8-9 referring to Babel, as Heiser says?
I mean,
I
they had access
it,
to texts that were written before they wrote their stuff. It doesn't make
absolutely.
that univocal. Like,
Yeah.
univocal just means that the text of the Bible is one message, one grand author, and one theological purpose, when it's very clearly not. There are multiple authors,
Yes.
sometimes multiple authors in one book that were spread out over many, many different time periods with different theological aims. So
Yeah. So don't confuse the Bible univocal, basically meaning that the conviction that the Bible is all saying the same thing and that everything in the Bible just interlocks perfectly and is perfectly consistent with one another. Don't confuse that with the Bible being self-referential. Because it's as Vishanti pointed out, yeah, there's a pile of literature, because it's not all from the same time period, so there's numerous places, as you point out. I'm not entirely convinced here that Deuteronomy 32 8-9 is referring to Babel. It could be, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. So but it's yeah, these authors, some authors were clearly aware of other works in the texts, and they would make allusions to them and they would refer to them. And then we have numerous instances, especially in a lot of the legal material, where authors are going through earlier pre-existing law codes and making changes and alterations to them as time goes on. And this is a lot of what we read as well in the prophets, especially Ezekiel, especially Jeremiah, especially, are offering commentary and reflection on legal material. That's a huge part of what they're doing. But I hope that helps to clarify what I mean by this. And thank you very much for the super chat. Hangfishy, good to see you. And thank you very much for the $10. If Yahweh is omniscient, then how can he want to be relational? He doesn't need these beings. He already knows whatever they will do or say. Do they also think Yahweh created all these other gods and beings? I think the answer to that last question is yes. I think for someone like Michael Jones, and for a lot of Christians who hold to this view of God's of the omni God, but also maintain the existence of other divine beings, they would say yes. He obviously created them because he created everything. And I honestly, I have no idea how to answer that first question,
I
or that
I can
comment, if
take a
he
stab
doesn't
at it.
need these
Just
beings. Yeah.
Yeah, just know that there's just an asterisk here. So the idea of an omnigod is a pretty late one, and it's something that didn't take hold in Judaism until, like, probably at least the Hellenistic period. It might have happened in the exile, like you start to see hints of it. That's where you get Ezekiel's vision of the Merkabah chariot. It's like, oh, we're in exile, but God
Yep.
needs to visit us. Oh, check it out. He's got like this super awesome chariot with these like crazy angelic beings driving it around. You don't
right.
need to take pockets of soil with you like that one guy did. So the idea that God isn't geographically restricted, that was a thing that developed later. And trying to, retcon an omnigod onto some of these earlier texts is really causing problems. And I think a lot of people that come out of omnigod traditions trip all over themselves, because you're trying to like impress upon the text ideas that don't string all the way through. So it's my take for the moment.
I think that works. And I tend to think you're picking up something that is I think generally problematic about the text, in that the biblical texts do not presume. They do not require they don't assume that God is an omnigod, that he's omniscient,
Yeah, I mean,
or
and there's a
omnipotent.
repeated Yeah, there's repeated stuff of like, this is my specific geographical territory, you're my specific people.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't fool around with other people unless there's like an immediate geopolitical need. He's not telling the Assyrians how to behave. He's not telling, Grecians how to behave. It's like, that doesn't apply. He's
That's a
not,
lot of it.
that's not in his purview.
Yep.
So the
Those
idea of the omnis came further down the road, so it's really
and
difficult to
honestly,
try to impress that
yeah,
back.
and honestly, many of the texts used to justify the omni attributes are texts that were written and created within this divine plurality, where the writer or the speaker is just extolling how amazing Yahweh is compared to all the other gods, right? It doesn't mean he's like, when it says you are all powerful, it doesn't mean that he's all powerful in like a cosmic singular sense. What it means is you are much more powerful than all those other gods, right? So but I think maybe we'll come back to super chats in a little bit. Let's thank you everyone for supporting the channel. And please keep bringing your questions in. But let's get back to the video, and let's start talking now about Deuteronomy 32 and Mark S. Smith. All right, so if you want to play the next, so
yeah, I was gonna say we just watched the section where they're starting to bring up Mark Smith. Do you want to
Yeah.
go to the slideshow?
No, let's watch up to 1:20:53 first, and then we'll bring up the
Okay,
slide.
I will back
Okay.
this up just slightly so that people can get a little more context.
Perfect. Good. Awesome.
And also, Elohim, also containing El, presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods.
Just a quick note, this is not a problem for biblical theology if you read Michael Heiser. Like, the divine counsel, yeah, is in biblical texts. It's never interpreted, though, according to the biblical authors, as if God needs a council to help him make decisions. A council is there because God is a relational being. He desires to have relationships with beings. It's not like Michael Heiser points out, the council in the biblical text is not like the council at Ugart, where like the gods have to fight or decide because they're all like impotent in different ways. The council in the biblical text never presents Yahweh as anything other than the high creator deity. So that's not an issue.
There's also a verse in which we read that El, here seen as a god of the entire earth, divided up the nations of the world among his sons, giving Israel to his son Yahweh. So here El and Yahweh have not just fused into the same God. We read, when Elyon allotted the nations for inheritance, when he divided up humanity, he fixed the boundaries for people, according to the number of divine sons. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his own inheritance.
All right, so let me back up so I can put that quote back up there. So this is the go-to text to try to argue that Yahweh was originally seen as a son of El. And this one, like, I feel like they're just stretching things here. That's not what it says. It doesn't say, the text doesn't even say El. It just says Elyon, which is a title meaning most high. It doesn't say Yahweh is a son. People make this inference to scholarly reconstruction, but it doesn't say that. And let me put up a quote here from Otto Eichfeld, which I have used so many times to make this point, because it really hits on it for me. So Otto Eichfeld said, the author of the song, it is true when speaking of Yahweh's relationship to his people, avoids probably intentionally the application of the hitherto used active verbal form, and so does not say directly that Elyon gave Israel or Jacob to Yahweh as his portion, but is content to establish the fact that Israel has become the property of Yahweh. So the verse does not say there was this Most High who is giving Yahweh an inheritance. That is an inference based on limited data.
Right.
If they became his property, whose property were they before that?
Yeah, we're gonna look at this this text, and I just did you happen to notice the date there of Otto Eichfeld's work? It's
This is so frustrating.
1956, people. Otto Eichfeld was an excellent Old Testament scholar, scholar of the ancient Near Eastern world. But guys, that was a lot has happened in 70 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of how complicated and nuanced this can get, because on the one hand, what Otto Eichfeld is saying is not wrong. Yes, Simone. It literally says inheritance. What Otto Eichfeld is saying is not wrong. However, we need to be very carefully nuanced in what we're talking about here. Before we do the Mark Smith quote, the Mark Smith stuff that Michael has next, I think the next slide I have is actually a text of Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9. Is that there?
You know what? Let
do I
me
do?
make sure. Nope, it's not. You
Nope.
just go straight to Mark
Okay.
Smith.
I just go straight to Mark Smith. So let's watch this next bit about Mark Smith, and then we will tackle the book. So this is an excellent book. God in Translation: Deities and Cross-Cultural Discourse in the Biblical World. This is a quote here from page 142 that Michael likes to cite a lot in his conversations on this topic. I've seen him throw this up on numerous occasions. Listen, it's really useful to read like an entire book sometimes. Maybe not always, but sometimes it's really useful to read an entire book, and it helps to provide you the necessary context and nuance, right, to what is happening, what's going on here. So we will talk about that. All right, let's see what he has to say, and then just stop it at I think the next timestamp is I said stop
It's
it
only
at
like a
1
2-minute clip.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes. Not even. It's like a
Mark
minute.
Smith in God in
1:22:05.
Translation says this: despite possible appearances to the contrary, the composer did not intend any picture of polytheism with his rendering of verses 8 and 9. In fact, he likely thought of El and Elyon simply as two of Yahweh's titles, as they are elsewhere in the Bible, and not as separate God El. The implied reference to the multiple divine Son likely did not bother the composer of the poem. In the wake of the identification of Elyon as a title of Yahweh, the divine sons are only implied in the text at best. It was probably easier for the composer to pay or no little attention to this matter, as this was a standard trope of divinity that the composer had inherited. Thus, the passage shows something of an older worldview of translatability of the national gods, even as it ultimately rejects it. So what's his basic point here? His basic point is that the composer is taking something, maybe some older theology ideas about there being this high God El who divides the nations up, gives them out to his sons. He's inheriting this idea or this trope, but in his view, that's Yahweh, who has divorced the nations, and he has made Jacob for himself in that. I am perfectly compatible with thinking that maybe that author inherited lines even from some older polytheistic worldview. And I make an analogy constantly with Acts 17, because Paul quotes the pagan poet Aratus. In him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said.
Oh, we went a little farther.
Yeah, that was
there,
past the timestamp.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I will say that Michael is getting, I think he's getting Mark Smith partly right. It's true. Insofar as this particular text is concerned, and that's Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 to 9, insofar as this particular text is concerned, and insofar as the entire Song of Moses is concerned, which is all of Deuteronomy chapter 32, Mark Smith argues that the writer was not trying to communicate a polytheistic picture of the world, but was drawing on one to make a point about Yahweh. But it's a little bit more involved than that. So I think it's important. We'll get to the quotation that Michael put up here in a bit, but we're going to start just talking a little bit about this book that Smith wrote. Smith's book is about the cross-cultural recognition of deities. So he's drawing on the earlier work of Egyptologist Jan Assmann, who coined this term in studies of ancient religions, translatability. And he says that translatability involves specific equations or identifications of deities across cultures and the larger recognition of deities of other cultures in connection to one's own deities. So translatability is basically, in this view, about understanding who the gods in all those other countries are and how they relate to the gods that you worship in your country. And sometimes we discover that ancient people thought that some gods worshipped in other places were actually the same gods that they worshipped, but maybe under a slightly different name. Not always, but that's what some of them thought. So now, in Osman's work, he's actually argued for the non-translatability of divinity for earliest Israel. He has basically said that there was no translatability for the ancient Israelites. Mark Smith is actually countering. This whole book is actually written to counter that idea. So Mark Smith is actually saying, no, Jan Osman is wrong. There actually is translatability of deities in the earliest stages of Israelite religion, and we have some data which shows that. So here I've put on the screen his thesis in and yeah, that's probably good to make it big, and I actually have to move my window here so I can see it properly. So here's what he says. This is his thesis that he puts forward in this book. Point number 1: in keeping with its scale and relatively local relations with other polities, Israel deployed a form of local translatability during the period of the monarchies, if not earlier. Point number 2: this translatability took the form of a worldview that could recognize other national gods as valid for Israel's neighbors, just as Yahweh was for Israel. Point 3: Israel's loss of translatability represented an internal development that corresponds with its experience of the initial stage of the international age emerging under the Assyrians and the Babylonians. So he says that this translatability started to shift and disappear at the point that Israel started to become subject to the imperial forces of the Assyrians first, and then the Babylonians. So this is, 8th century, right? 8th, 7th, 6th centuries when this happens. 4, the conceptual shift in this period involved a sophisticated hermeneutic that retained older formulations of translatability within expressions of non-translatability and monotheism. Point 5, the hermeneutic of theism within ancient Israel and Yehud was an ongoing intellectual project involving various forms of textual harmonization. And 6, of Osman's Mosaic distinction. This is what he calls the non-translatability of ancient Israel. He calls it the Mosaic distinction. If Osman's Mosaic distinction is to be maintained, it would be during the late biblical and post-biblical reception of the Bible than generally the Bible itself, much less ancient Israel, when it comes into focus. So what he's saying here in this last point is that that point in time at which Israel started to assert a strong monotheism, or something like a monolatry or a henotheism, didn't really happen until like the post-biblical period, which we're pushing well into the Persian period at that point. The project here, the entire project, and I've got the table of contents laid out for you so you can see what it looks like. He starts by exploring translatability first in surrounding cultures. In chapter 2, he talks about translatability and the evidence for it in ancient Israel. and using the biblical text. Look at point 2 there in chapter 2, evidence of translatability in the Hebrew Bible. Chapter 3, he then moves on to the rejection of translatability in Israel and the impact of Mesopotamian empires in divinity. And this is where he would actually put Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9. And this is also probably a point at which I think I disagree with Mark Smith. I think the polytheistic elements of Deuteronomy 32 are pretty strong still. I suspect I think they're a little stronger than he does, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. I want you to notice chapter 4, though. This is an interesting chapter. He's called it Protecting God Against Translatability. Biblical censorship in post-exilic Israel. And you'll notice point 2 here, censorship in and for Israel, the cases of Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9, and Genesis 14, 22. One of the really, really interesting features of this passage in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9, is the fact that it has been massively and frequently reworked by later scribes. And the reworkings of this text is actually the evidence that many readers of this text were incredibly uncomfortable with the implications of the picture that were being portrayed in verses 8 to 9 of the position and place of Elyon relative to Yahweh. All right, so let me pull up my note. I keep putting my notes down. I'm sorry, guys. Let's see what's next. Okay. All right. If you want to put up the next slide. So you'll remember, guys, that Michael Jones mentioned the oracles in Numbers chapter 23 early on as his evidence for the early exclusive worship of Yahweh in ancient Israel as a high creator God. It's quite interesting because Mark Smith actually has a discussion of Balaam's oracles in Numbers chapter 23 to 24, but these appear in his chapter 2, where he discusses translatability, active translatability in the Hebrew Bible. So I'm going to just read some of what he says here, starting on page 96. The Balaam poems in Numbers 23 to 24 have in fact been read in a manner that runs counter to Handel's discussion. Handel was also of the opinion that there was no translatability in the Hebrew Bible. That's Ron Handel. For some commentators, the use of multiple divine titles in the Balaam poems suggests an independent tradition of El in addition to Yahweh. Thus, Levine notes, we may conclude that Deuteronomy 32 must surely have been composed after El was synthesized with Yahweh. The Balaam poems, those in Numbers 23 to 24, in contrast, were composed before this synthesis took place, so they portray El, Elyon, and Shaddai as independent beings. Thus, contrary to the view espoused by Handel, such figures have been brought together with the figure of Yahweh, arguably implying an early form of translatability between El and Yahweh. A fair reading of the very difficult evidence would suggest that Yahweh was a god secondarily imported into the highlands of Israel from the south, Edom, Paran, Teman, Seir, in Deuteronomy 33, verse 2, Judges 5, 4, Psalm 68, verse 8 and 18, and Habakkuk 3, verses 3 and 7. And that he was identified secondarily at some point with the indigenous Canaanite and early Israelite god El. This would be reflected in later texts that reflect an older distinction between the two gods. Next page. Oh, was that it? That's too bad. I thought I had another one in there. Yeah, was that page 96?
Yeah, that's all
Sorry.
you had.
Oh, that's too bad. Oh well. Let me see if I can just give me a sec. I think I can actually oh, no. Hmm, maybe not. Oh well. Uh but listen, I hope everyone can see what I'm getting at here. Vishanti, based on that, does it sound like Mark Smith is holding up this idea of Michael's that there was never any distinction between El and Yahweh in the Bible or in early Israel, and from the very earliest time, uh, Yahweh was always the supreme and the only God that was worshipped exclusively by the Israelites. Were you catching
I
that
mean,
message from Mark Smith?
the excerpt that we just read said the opposite of that,
It said the opposite, guys. Mark
which
Smith.
is, as we say on Dapper Dinosaur's channel, a Trojan source. When you quote a text and then it actively contradicts what you just said about it.
Well, see, this is what happens when you actually read an entire book and not just, a paragraph out of a later chapter somewhere in the middle. Because what Mark Smith is talking about, what he's going through here, is the process, right? He's tracking it from the earliest stages of what this polytheistic picture looked like in ancient Israel, and then tracking that forward to see how and when it got to a point where Yahweh was the only God worshipped exclusively by the Israelites. I'm not entirely sure he's 100% successful in achieving that final point, but importantly, his whole project here rather assumes a polytheistic picture in the earliest stages of the writing of the Hebrew Bible. But I think it's important, just so everyone knows what we're talking about here in terms of the text that he's mentioned from Numbers 23 to 24. Let's look at those, shall we? So, and again, these are my translations of oracles of Balaam from Numbers 23 and 24. There's a series of four, I think, four oracles, individual oracles of Balaam, that appear in this text. They have been identified by scholars as very early. So these are early early texts from the Hebrew Bible. Probably, I think this is the kind of stuff that tends to be dated around the eighth century. I'm not sure if it goes all the way back to the 9th, but 8th century for sure. Here's the first oracle from Aram. Balak has led me, the king of Moab, from the mountains of the east. Go, bind Jacob for me in a curse. Go, curse for me Israel. How can I enchant whom El has not enchanted? How can I curse whom Yahweh has not cursed? From the top of the mountains I can see him. From the hills I can gaze down at him. See the people settled alone. Among the nations he is not considered. Who has counted the dust of Jacob? Number the dust cloud of Israel. That my life might die a death of righteous men, that I might take after them. So that's the first oracle in verses 7 to 10. Here's the second one. Get up, Balak, listen, give ear to me, son of Zippor. El is not a man that he might lie, or a son of Adam that he might change his mind. Would he actually speak and not do, or say something and not bring it about? See, I have taken up to bless. When he blesses, I cannot undo it. No disaster is in the sight for Jacob, no trouble in view for Israel. Yahweh, his God, is with him. Now, the next couple of lines here are interesting, and maybe bring up the rest of this here, Vish. The shout of a king among them. So this is speaking of the people of Israel, the people of Jacob, but this is with reference to Yahweh, his God, who is with him. It's identifying Yahweh basically as the king of Israel. El is the one who took them out of Egypt, like horns of an ox for them. Hey, Vish, why do you think Balaam describes El here as having horns like an ox? Any thoughts?
Kind of reminds me of the golden cow that they made at Sinai when Moses disappeared for a few weeks.
Yep. You know, common
Thinking about
depictions
that.
of the god
Kind of
El.
reminds me of El, yeah,
Yeah.
being depicted as a
Common
bull.
depictions of El in the Levant during the early to mid Iron Age are as a bull. Chrissy's just pointed out here his most notable epithet is Bull El. So this is not an accident, people. I particularly like this next line too.
Hang
Like
on,
horns of an ox
this
for
is
them.
the funniest
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Okay.
This is someone says they didn't make it, Vish. Aaron just threw some gold in the fire and a calf fell out. Like that to me, I've said
that's
this
fair,
before,
that's
it's
fair.
one of the most hysterically funny, if not the funniest entire line in the Hebrew Bible. Is literally Aaron. In Hebrew, he goes, I just threw the gold in the fire and a calf came out.
Yeah.
It's
so good. It's so
so
good.
good. Like, man, what?
It's like
It's so
yeah.
funny.
Depictions of Aaron need to be, you know, Homer Simpson's memes.
Yeah,
So
they really do.
totally, they really do. All right. I like this next line. For there is no omen, Nachash, in Jacob. That's an interesting word.
Oh, Nachash.
So this is not,
Like,
it's not
spell,
quite
curse, hissing thing. Yeah.
snake. So this isn't quite Nachash, right? From Genesis chapter 3, the serpent in the garden is the Nachash. But this is the same root with a very, very slightly different vocalization. And the verbal root itself means to divine, like to what I mean, what's is there like a proper modern English word for divine? What would you call it? Fortune telling is maybe
Fortune
the best.
telling.
So
I mean, using divination methods,
yeah,
like there's different forms of it. Tea leaf reading,
horoscope,
tarot
seeking the, you know,
cards,
talking to the
horoscopes.
dead,
Yeah, it's
those sorts of
your
things.
yeah.
Otherworldly, I guess looking for otherworldly knowledge is a good way of describing it. But I think I don't
Scrying
think
as an elder brother.
oh
That's
I don't
also
know.
good.
I don't know that
Scrying.
word at all. That's cool.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's an accident, guys, that and I wanted to highlight this here. I don't think it's an accident, and I've talked about this before. I'm writing about this in the book that I'm currently working on. It's not an accident that the snake in Genesis 3 is a Nakash. This is a nod to, you know, otherworldly divine powers at work. The Nakash in Genesis 3 is a snake, yes, but he's like a cosmic snake. He's a divine being. Anyways, let's continue. There is no omen in Jacob and no oracle in Israel. In a moment, he speaks to Jacob. Israel is what El has made. Look, a people rises up like a lioness. Like a lion, he stands up. He will not rest until he devours prey and drinks the blood of the slain. Again, I'm going to point out here. I hope you picked it up in the first the first oracle of Balaam. Notice we've got Yahweh distinct from El in this particular oracle, and according to Mark Smith and according to, you know, commenters on this text, this is you know, written at a time before or in when this translatability between the high God and Yahweh was just kind of starting, right? There's still separate deities, but this is kind of when it's starting. Okay. The next one. And as we read these guys, something else I want to point out is you will notice there's some repetition of a lot of different phrases and terms throughout these oracles. And the reason for that is probably because these are like versions of something like the same oracle from this early story of Balaam, Balak, and the Israelites in the plains of Moab. But the author in the book of Numbers has just kind of thrown them together as an editor does. He doesn't want to lose any of this kind of stuff, so he just includes everything. And I gotta say, I love this so much. These opening lines of this poem, this oracle in Numbers 24 verses 3-9. An oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, an oracle of the man, the open eye, an oracle of the one who hears the words of El, who sees the visions of Shaddai, who is prostrate, whose eyes are open. Isn't that cool?
He's psychic, bruh.
That's just so cool. And notice
He's like on
here,
the cosmic plane, man.
yeah, he
He's
is.
opened that third eye.
Yes. Something I think that that I want everyone to notice here as well is when it comes to Balaam, the source of his visions is never Yahweh. He tells us he's the one who hears the words of El. He sees the visions of Shaddai. These are his sources, right? These are the gods from whom he hears and sees. Who is prostrate, whose eyes are open? Yeah. Okay. How good are your tents, Jacob? Your dwellings, Israel, stretched out like groves of dates, like gardens on a river, like lush grasses Yahweh has planted. Like cedars on the water, let water flow from his buckets. It's a weird expression. It actually probably means something like the boughs of trees, but we don't know. We just don't know so much of this stuff. It's crazy. His seed in abundant waters. May his king rise up over Agag. And notice here, who is the king of Israel according to these oracles by Balaam? It's Yahweh, guys. It's Yahweh. May his king rise up over Agag. May his kingdom be exalted. Here again, this is going to sound familiar. El is the one who took him out from Egypt like horns of an ox for them. He will devour his enemy nations. Their bones he will crush. His arrows he will shatter. He bends low, lies down like a lion, like a lioness who can stand up to him. Blessed are those blessed by you. Cursed are those cursed by you. Is there one more? There is one more. Yeah, let's just put the whole thing up here so I remember. Yeah, verses 15-19 in Numbers 24. An oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, an oracle of the man, the open eye, an oracle of the one who hears the words of El, who attains the knowledge of Elyon, who sees the visions of Shaddai. Look at his sources here, people. This is Balaam gets his information from El, from Elyon, from Shaddai, not Yahweh. Who is prostrate, whose eyes are open? I see it, but not yet. I gaze down on it, but not near. A star walks from Jacob. Most translations say comes out from Jacob. I think I like walks. It's the same word that we use for
Hebrew
people.
word there?
It's halak. It's the same word for walking.
Good.
And I'll
can
tell you why I like, because this is the kochav. This is the kochav who walk. This is the kochav. Halak. I think it's halak hakochav. So this is a star walks from Jacob. The reason I translated it like this is because within an ancient Hebrew mindset, the stars are not, giant balls of gas or fire. They're not even lights in the sky. They're gods. They're divine beings. So when you see something like this, a star walking from Jacob, he's talking about a divine being walking out, coming out from
This is
Jacob.
very much in the anthropomorphic era of
Yes.
gods.
Yes. A staff rises up from Israel. It smashes the forehead of Moab. It breaks down all the sons of Seth. Edom will be a possession. Seir will be a possession. His enemies. Israel is the one showing strength. Let him rule from Jacob. He will exterminate survivor from the city. So those
I like this
are
opening part where it's like you see the stereotypical fortune tellers where they're like, something's coming through. I'm getting a vision. That's I see it, but not yet. It's like I'm looking at it, but it's not here yet. Gives me very much.
It's pretty
fortune
cool,
teller
right?
vibes.
And I'm happy you brought that up, because if you pull up the next slide here, we've got something special. So are you aware of the Deir Alla inscriptions, Vishanti?
Mhm.
Yes. So these are I think 8th century. No, I don't think they're 8th century. These are inscriptions on plaster in a site called Deir Alla, which is in the Transjordan. It's on the other side of the Jordan River, from Israel, from Palestine. Incredible text. It's an incredible text, because it's a vision of Balaam, son of Beor. And I have just put up here, I believe this is the translation from Context of Scripture. Just the opening lines of this vision of Balaam that we know from the Deir Alla inscriptions from the 8th century BCE, and just look at what you see here and think about some of the stuff that we just read in these visions of Balaam that were preserved in the biblical text. The misfortunes of the book of Balaam, son of Beor. A divine seer was he. The gods came to him at night, and he beheld a vision in accordance with El's utterance. This said to Balaam, son of Beor, so it will be done with not surviving. No one has seen what you have heard. Balaam arose in the morning. He summoned the heads of the assembly before him, and for 2 days he fasted and wept bitterly. Do you remember much of the story of Balaam, Vishanti?
I mean, I know that he apparently, I just read this like a few days ago. He got wiped out in the revenge of Amalek, or not Amalek. Baal Peor.
Yes, he got wiped out at Baal Peor,
He got killed.
So he is a foreign. He's a non-Israelite
foreign prophet or
seer,
or
diviner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who has been contracted by the king of Moab,
Balak. Yeah.
And
like,
when
listen.
when Balak sends his messengers, this is really interesting. If you read this in Numbers 20, 22 or 23, I think, this part, when Balak sends his messengers to see if they can hire Balaam to come and curse the Israelites for him, it says they go to his house, and then he has visions in the night. Talks to God in the middle of the night. It says in the text when he's told that he's allowed to go. I actually think this line is repeated a couple times here. It says that Balaam rose early in the morning. You'll notice he's summoning the heads of the assembly to him. In the biblical text, he's meeting with the princes and the chiefs of Moab. It's all kind of interesting. Then his intimates entered into his presence, and they said to Balaam, son of Beor, why do you fast and why do you weep? And he said to them, be seated, and I will relate to you what the Shaddai gods have planned, and go see the acts of the gods. Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
I mean, so in the biblical text, I pointed this out. Who does Balaam hear from and receive visions from?
Ale.
And the
Shaddai.
Shaddai and the Shaddai gods.
Mhm.
Here, it says he beheld a vision in accordance with El's utterance. I will relate to you what the Shaddai gods have planned. It's so cool. It's so neat. I love it. All right. But
this
yeah,
is very cool.
we got to, I guess we have to plow forward because I have many things to say. But the point here I want to make is that far from Numbers chapter 23 preserving this sense of Yahweh's distinction as a high creator God alone, for the Israelites, this is not happening, people. El and Yahweh and Elyon and the Shaddai gods, they're all in there in the Balaam oracles. Importantly, Yahweh, I think what I see in the Balaam oracles, Yahweh is distinct as the God of Israel, yes, but Balaam talks to El, and he sees what the Shaddai gods show him. He talks to Elyon, right? So yeah, there's limited translatability here. Okay, so we're still going through some of this stuff from Smith, so we'll have to bring the slides up first, I'm afraid, but I'll try to get through this stuff fairly quickly. All right, so the next one is, now this is where Mark Smith starts talking about the rejection of translatability in Israel and the impact of Mesopotamian empires on divinity. So this is during the period of the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire. So 8th, 7th, 6th century. This is the time period that Mark Smith has in mind. And the text that he is focusing on is one that we've looked at already. He actually starts this section with Psalm 82. And I want to read a little bit about what he says concerning this text here. I'll start with this first. The preceding chapter, this section is entitled Rejecting Translatability in Ancient Israel. So these are strategies that the biblical writers are developing to counter these earlier forms of translatability, like what we're seeing in the Balaam oracles. So he starts off by saying the preceding chapter discusses cases of Israelite translatability and the worldview that gave expression to it. In this worldview, each nation had a national god who operated more or less on par with one another. In addition to the text surveyed in chapter 2, there are important cases that dramatize this form of translatability at the same time as they explicitly reject it. This may sound contradictory, but it is common for polemical texts to discuss the very ideas that they condemn. In embodying the older worldview of translatability and the newer one that rejects it, these texts are particularly helpful for illustrating the shift in the circles that produce these texts. And then he brings up Psalm 82, and Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, and Deuteronomy 6 verse 4. So you want to flip the page. I want to take a look just quickly. I just want to read what he has to say about Psalm 82 here. We remember, we read this. This is Yahweh anonymously standing up in the council of El and condemning all the other gods, the sons of Elyon. In this context, Elohim, here representing the God of Israel, Yahweh, is one member of this larger divine assembly of gods. In the first half of verse 1, Elohim literally sets himself and thus stands, or perhaps takes his place, or presents himself as the Satan, thank you very much, Chrissy H., in the divine council. This may be understood literally as the page 134 over there is on the left, may be understood literally as the council of El. Remember, this is not Yahweh's council, it's the council of El. The figure Elohim, God, indicts as mere mortals the other gods, Elohim, whom he had thought were all sons of Elyon. As the indictment indicates, the denounced figures were considered to be gods, all children, divine children of Elyon, and now they are to be viewed not as gods, but as dead like humans. The psalm concludes with the human speaker calling on Elohim to judge, rule, less likely to prevail, and to assume all nations as his inheritance. This call represents a move for Yahweh to extend his dominion beyond Israel, the traditional inheritance of this deity. As we noted in 1 Samuel 25:19, and as we shall see shortly in Deuteronomy 32:9, Israel as the inheritance of Yahweh is a widespread image of the Bible. There's a bunch of texts there that show that. Psalm 82:6 plays on this traditional notion in expressing its vision of God's dominion over the world. Scholars have generally noted biblical references to El Elyon, for example, in Genesis 14:19-22, and compared the Ugaritic background of this type scene of the divine council headed by the god El, especially in KTU 1.2. This type scene includes the idea of the gods as the sons of the god El, which is also well known from other texts. Many commentators have viewed Psalm 82 in light of this traditional usage. Accordingly, El in verse 1 and Elyon in verse 6 seem to be vestiges of an older notion of the god El as the head of the divine assembly, as many commentators have noted. To be sure, the figure in this assembly remains in the background. Remember, El is no longer active, but it's still his council, as the text is focused on the victory of Elohim over the other Elohim. In recent years, it has been questioned more recently whether or not Psalm 82 represents Elohim and El Elyon as two different figures. The footnote there is to an article by Michael Heiser. The psalm is not explicit on the question, and the presentation in Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, to be discussed shortly, with its similarities to Psalm 82, might seem to favor the identification. I'm going to stop there, but the next 5 or 6 pages of this chapter forward Mark Smith's very tight argument for why El Elyon must be seen as a different deity from Yahweh in Psalm 82. So in his mind, this is a text that's rejecting translatability because even though El or Elyon is still in the picture, he's not doing anything. He's not active. He's very much recessed into the background. But we understand from his presence there, we understand from the fact that Yahweh is operating within the council of El, that there is a background knowledge to this psalm that we just have to intuit. It's not provided for us in bold typeface, but virtually all scholars are agreed that at one time there was a sense, certainly among some, if not most people who worshiped Yahweh in Israel, that he was part of the council of El. And as we shall see, moving on now to Deuteronomy chapter 32, that he was also at one time understood to be a son of El. All right, I'm checking my notes here again. How we doing? How is everyone feeling? I know this is taking a long time, and I'm sorry for that. All right. First of all, if you go to the next slide, Vish, let's look at Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9. And we got to start with the textual issues. This is the Hebrew text. I've broken this out into its poetic pairs, right? These are very important, and these run side by side. So we're reading this from the right pair to the left pair, back to the right pair, in the following line to the left pair. Okay. Here's what it says: ask your fathers, and he will make known to you. And yes, that's correct. So this is a plural. Oh, sorry. No, it is singular. Ask your father, and he will make known to you, your elders, and they will tell you. When Elyon gave nations for an inheritance, and that's an infinitive construct of the verb nachal in the hiphil form, which means to give something as an inheritance to someone else. When Elyon gave the nations as an inheritance, that's the indirect object. When he separated the sons of Adam, he is setting boundaries of the people by the number of the sons of God. In most of your English Bibles, this reads by the numbers of the sons of Israel, and we'll talk a little bit about the textual issues here in just a second. As such, the share of Yahweh, the Halech Adonai, is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance, Nachalato. All right. I just want to point out what should be patently obvious here. There are two divine beings in view in the space of these 6 or 8 lines here. I've actually got verses 7 to 9. Elyon is the one who's depicted giving the inheritance. The inheritance is being numbered as according to the sons of God. The other divine being here is Yahweh. And really, the only way to read this text is that he is on the receiving end of whatever it is that is included in Bahan Kel, that is in the inheritance that Elyon is giving. Elyon is giving nations. Yahweh's inheritance, his share, his portion, his chalek, is Jacob, his people. I think this is abundantly clear that there is, if not an intended distinction, as Mark Smith attempts to argue by the writer of this poem, an unavoidable distinction. That is, this is such a deeply embedded, well-worn trope about Yahweh being within the council of deities of El, with Yahweh being included among the sons of El, that for all his best efforts, the writer of this poem, attempting to downplay and soften and mute and reduce that relationship, can't help it. It comes through. It's glaring. Is it glaring, Vish?
I mean, it's pretty blatant. I also want to highlight Chrissy saying careful to note.
The Hanachel is accusativus rei. For example, it refers to actions taken upon the nations. Yes, the nations are given as an inheritance, not dative. They are not given something to them. Contra David Falk, that is correct. We're going to go through the textual issues here with Deuteronomy 32, and then I'm going to, let me just look at my notes here. I'm going to try and quickly read through what Mark Smith has to say about this, and then we will get to some more super chats. All right, does that sound good? Everyone good? Okay. Next, please, Vishanti. So there are.
Oh my God, why did you do all of these individually?
Oh shoot! What did you do?
God,
Oh, there we
why?
go. Sorry. There we go. Sorry. I'm sorry. You can build my slideshow next time if you don't like it.
You didn't have to make every single line individually pop up. That's what I was
know.
saying.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Ugh.
Yes, that was annoying of me. All right. So there are some very important textual variants in this passage. And when Mark Smith discusses this passage, yes, I am missing Targum Jonathan or pseudo Jonathan. Sorry about that, Chrissy. I was honestly trying to bash this out quickly. It's hard to do. So when Mark Smith discusses this passage, he discusses strategies taken by scribes to address the problem of translatability, problems that they see within the text that they are attempting to correct and to censor. So they employ what Mark Smith identifies as 4 different strategies. I'm going to show you 3 of them here. The first one appears in the first witness, the oldest witness to this text in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q Deuteronomy Q, otherwise known as 4Q44, Lemispar B'nai Elohim. This is the original reading. The boundaries of the people are set according to the number of the sons of God. Now, another, oh, this didn't come out very nice. My accents didn't work. That sucks. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, we see the first of these strategies at work. The Septuagint translates kata arithmon angelon theu. So this is translated according to the number of the angels of God. So what the Septuagint has done has basically downgraded the divine beings, the sons of the gods, to angels. Problem solved. The Septuagint translator is working to avoid the polytheistic implications that are, obvious within this text. The next strategy is what happens in the Masoretic text. This is what appears in most of our English translations of the Old Testament of this passage. The Masoretic text says, Lemispar B'nai Yisrael. The boundaries of the people were set up according to the number of the sons of Israel. So in various ways, what the writer of the Masoretic text is doing is just eliminating the sons of God altogether and saying, no. The boundaries of the people were set up according to how many people, how many Israelites there were. There's mention in Genesis chapter 49 of the descendants of Jacob who left Canaan to go live in Egypt, numbered 70. And this also corresponds with a well-worn ancient trope that we know from Canaan, we know it from Hittite texts, we know it from, I believe, Babylonian, or sorry, maybe not Babylonian, but certainly from some other Akkadian texts, that the high god El and his consort Asherah had 70 children, had 70 sons. And these universally kind of corresponded to the ancient people's understanding of the number of people and nations in the world. All right, let's continue to see what Mark Smith has to say. So this is the quote that Michael brings up from Mark Smith, but I've backed it up a little bit. Michael starts on page 142, but I wanted to start a little bit further to provide some added context to what's going on here. And as you can see, this is within his chapter on rejecting the translatability in ancient Israel. So Mark Smith says, I want to note specifically here that the national worldview presupposed by the older reading of the verses. So the national worldview is that in which El is the high God and Yahweh is part of the council of the sons of the gods. The national worldview presupposed by the older reading of the verses and the rejection of its implied polytheism in the larger context of the poem. Conversely, it is clear that the poem as a whole rejects translatability. This is evident from the poem in verse 39, where it says, "There is no God along with me," Yahweh speaking. It is also implicit in verses 17 and 21, which characterize other gods as no gods. On the other hand, it is also clear that the scribe who produced option 1, and that's the reading from the Masoretic text where he chose to replace the sons of God with the sons of Israel, felt the force of polytheism in verse 8 and altered it. The vast majority of scholars who have addressed verses 8 to 9 view option number 1 as a deliberate alteration to avoid the picture of polytheism. Emmanuel Tove comments, "The scribe of an earlier text did not feel at ease with the possible polytheistic picture and replaced sons of El with sons of Israel." It's actually sons of Elohim, with sons of Israel. In this picture, El Elyon is the head god who oversees the division of the world into nations given to the various gods of the world. And in this scenario, Yahweh is one of the gods who receives his inheritance from El. Who receives his inheritance from El Elyon in Yahweh's case. In Yahweh's case, the people, Jacob, is his portion. It's his share. That's literally what the word means. It's his inheritance. It is evident that the picture in verses 8 to 9 draw on an older polytheistic worldview, as scholars have long noted. In this worldview, the old god El and his consort Asherah had 70 divine children, as found in the Ugaritic texts. Otmar Kiel and Christoph Uelinger compared a speech in the story of Wenamun with Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9. "For Amun makes thunder in the sky ever since he placed Seth beside him. Indeed, Amun has founded all the lands. He founded them after founding the land of Egypt, from which you have come." This theme survived in later Levantine tradition, well down to the Greco-Roman period, as witnessed in Philo of Byblos' work, The Phoenician History. According to Philo, the god Kronos, who is identified explicitly with El, went about the world assigning different lands to various different gods. Thus, Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9 reflects an old version of the divine founding of the world known in broader West Semitic tradition, one that is otherwise eclipsed in the biblical record by Israel-specific foundational traditions. Even though the older polytheistic worldview showed through Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9 enough to bother the scribe of option 1, remember I said I think it's glaring. The composer of Deuteronomy 32 had implicitly effaced this polytheistic notion and had been inherited from Israel's old literary heritage by combining it with clear monolotrous statements later in the poem. So I'm just going to pause here because all of this is stuff that precedes where Michael decided to start his quotation from Mark Smith. And what Mark Smith is saying is that it is obvious that the background of Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9 is this well-worn, widely received polytheistic worldview that clearly is something that Israel inherited. But now he's going to argue that it's something that the poem as a whole rejects. You can't, and I want to point out, you don't see that just by focusing on verses 8 to 9. You can't see it there. The only way we know of this rejection is because of other places in the poem, as in verses 39 or verses 17 and 21. And I would say that I'm still not sure how much I agree with Mark Smith on this point, but if I'm going to agree with Mark Smith, I think he would probably agree with me that if the author of Deuteronomy 32, if the author of the Song of Moses did indeed intend for this to be a muted picture, for this to portray Yahweh as the same deity as Elyon, then he really fucked this up. He really, really did. I would say that if that was his intention, he failed spectacularly. And I think that's the point. The reason why this is such a contentious text is because we can all see it, because it absolutely is not obvious that this is a monotheistic text, that this is promoting some form of monotheism. It just is not. Even if the writer of this poem was straining to avoid that picture, he couldn't help it. It shines through. It's glaring. So this is where Michael starts his quotation. Despite possible appearances to the contrary, at least for the scribe of option number 1, the scribe of option number 1 is the one who chose to retain the reading B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, as opposed to replacing it with something like Angelon Theo, the angels of God, or the sons of Israel. So at least for the scribe of option number 1, the composer did not intend any picture of polytheism with his rendering of verses 8 and 9. In fact, he likely thought that El and Elyon simply as two of Yahweh's titles as they are elsewhere in the Bible. So this is where Michael begins his quotation, and we won't finish it, but I want this to be set in context, and I hope everyone can see this. Even though this is what Mark Smith is saying, all that background information is really, really important to what he means. Okay? Mark Smith means to tell us that despite his best efforts, the author of this poem could not erase the polytheistic roots of this worldview that the Israelites inherited, in which Yahweh was a member of the sons of God, in which he received an inheritance along with the other sons of God from Elyon. All right. I think I'm done preaching. Can you just flip the next slide? I think it's just the next page, but we won't do that. Yeah, actually, let's just skip this next section
You're killing
altogether.
me, Smalls.
Who's it? Me?
Like,
Is
don't
it me who's killing you?
don't say it. Don't say it. Just having 142, and then you have 143 over here. It just.
I'm
it's
sorry.
making my
I
Dad,
know.
don't say
it
the
sucks.
thing.
It sucks. I'm sorry. But just skip the next. What's on the next slide? Because I think we're gonna skip it. So this is this is where importantly, that was chapter 3. In chapter 4, we're not going to read any of this. We'll skip through this, but Mark Smith actually goes through his detailed discussion of Deuteronomy 32, and it's really, really important for understanding that earlier stuff. Keep going, Vish. What's the next one? And the next one. All right. So I think we're just going to look at this again. I want this to be crystal clear to everyone. Look at this. Elyon is the one giving the nations for an inheritance. He is the one who's separating the people. He's setting their boundaries according to the number of the sons of God. As a result, that's what the key means in the 4th line. This is resultative. As a result, the share of Yahweh, Chalek Adonai, is his people. Jacob is Chavel Nachalato, the allotment of his inheritance. Does it get more obvious than this. What's going on? Does it? I hope not. Look, guys, I do not know what this means.
You've
I'm
never seen The
sorry.
Sandlot?
The Sandlot? That's a
Uh-huh.
movie, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an old movie. Is that a Disney movie?
I mean, it came out in like the late 80s, early 90s. It's about, kids and their
Yeah,
local
I
baseball.
saw
It's
that, but
really
I'm
good.
an
Yeah.
old man and I haven't watched it in a very long time. So,
Okay.
should we look at some super chats, and then I want to move on because Joel's going to
Yes.
say something about the structure of this text I want to say something about, and then there's a few more clips to finish up. But let's look at some super chats. There's still over 250 people watching, and I appreciate it so much, guys. But as long as you're watching, I'm going to keep going here. If you're having fun, I'm having fun. All right, I have to go over here because all right. We're on Claude Simeon here, right? Thank you very much for $5. You used the word glorify in one of your translations. How is that different from praise? Even as a Christian, I never know what glorify really meant. So this is a part of the problem of translating ancient languages. In a language like ancient Hebrew, in the texts of the Bible, we very unfortunately have a whole bunch of words that appear. Some appear a lot, and they appear in other cognate languages, which help provide us an understanding of what they mean. But others appear much, much less frequently, but also seem to mean kind of the same thing. So here's a big problem. There's a lot of synonymous terminology in the Hebrew Bible for terms like exalt, praise, glorify. Now, how do we understand the difference of that? Honestly, it depends on the word that I used for that I used the word that I was translating from when I said praise. I think in simplest terms, I'll try to explain it like this. The root of kavod of glorify is kavod. It means to be heavy. When it's applied to God, it's talking about the weightiness, the largeness of God. When it's applied verbally in expressions of worship to Him, it's a way of promoting and magnifying. I hate using these synonyms, but I'm bad at this. It's a way of fixating on the weightiness of God and His supreme greatness in terms of His, like, it comes from weight, but it's moved past that. It's become, that's the etymology, but it's deeper than that. When you see a word in the Hebrew Bible like praise, quite often the root of that word will have something to do with shouting or with singing or with a strong verbal expression. So I would say maybe that's the best way to help explain to you or help you to understand some of the difference. Some of this is probably artificial. Like I said, there's a lot of these words that we're not totally sure precisely what they mean, and some of this is just guesswork. But thank you very much for the super chat. Sorry. How do you say that? David at a Deir for 4,000 somethings. Thank you very much. That seems like a lot. I really appreciate it. Does Leviticus 23 indicate that child sacrifice was
Nigerian
performed in the
Nigerian
in the Jerusalem temple?
Thanks, Google.
I'm going to pull up the text, Leviticus 23. I think I know the one. And Leviticus 20 verse 13. And I myself have will set my face against that man, and I will cut him off from among his people, because his offspring he gave for a Moloch offering, because he defiled the Mikdash. This is
Oh.
my sanctuary, and he
You're saying verse 3,
profaned
not 13?
et shame. Yeah, this is right. He profaned
Okay.
et shem kodoshi. He profaned my holy name, because of his offering of a Molech sacrifice. He defiled my sanctuary and he profaned my name. Your instincts, I think, are absolutely correct. The fact that the sacred space of Yahweh has been defiled and profaned by this child sacrifice indicates that it was one that was performed in the temple. I am among the group of scholars who think that this is with reference to a child sacrifice offered actually to Yahweh, which I believe is something that happened. All right, what's next? But thank you very much for the super chat again. Kevin Harris has been a member for 1 month. Welcome. What would be the etymology of the name Balaam? And I am, as far as I am, unsure. And I think that is an open question. Let me just pull this up and see what Halot has to say.
Gotta love Halot.
I love me some Halot. So importantly, guys, it's not, Baal is not in Balaam. Okay. So it doesn't have anything to do with Baal. This is what Halot says. Yeah, as a question mark right away. That's a good sign. The etymology is uncertain. Possibly Baal what does it say here? Possibly Bala plus so something along with people. It could be maybe Bala means to be confused, which seems odd. And there's no ion in the in this instance. I guess the two ions would experience some elision, but there's only one ion in there in terms of two. But maybe it has something to do with confusion. I'm doubtful of that, because Balaam, or Balaam, as it's vocalized in the Deir Alla, is not a derogatory title. What does it say here? Some have suggested glutton, and that's kind of it. There's no. It's an open question. We don't know what the etymology of Balaam is. There's a couple of suggestions, but sadly, that's I'm afraid I can't answer your question better than that. So, all right, but thank you for joining my channel. Equus Andromedae for $6.99. This is good stuff, Dr. Kip. One of my favorite topics. Can't wait to go back and listen to the whole thing. Keep up the good work, you two. Thank you very much. And I mean, Vishanti deserves an enormous round of applause for having to put up with my terrible slide presentation. So what's next?
No,
Vesper.
it's just inconvenient. It's not bad.
I know it's terrible. Vesper for $1.99. Is Yahweh separated from El in any of the DSS texts? Potentially. It's and again, this is where there is some uncertainty on this question, right? A lot of this evidence, as we've been reading, Mark Smith seems to think that Deuteronomy 32 verses in Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, the writer did not intend for Elyon and Yahweh to be seen separately. But I'm not sure I agree, right? I understand the case that he's making. I think it's certainly a good one. I'm just not sure. And as we discover, there are also texts in the Second Temple period, late texts, Hellenistic texts, where this distinction between the high God, El, and Yahweh appears to continue. It's something we actually see implicitly in the book of Daniel. In chapter 7, there is a vision of the Son of Man. And there's a recent book by Michael Segal, and he's argued very, very persuasively that the vision of the Son of Man, who presents himself before the Ancient of Days, is Yahweh. Basically presenting himself before the throne of El, the high God. And this is like the mid-2nd century. So there are certainly texts within the Dead Sea Scrolls which seem to allude to this ongoing relationship as something that that was viewed as current. But thank you very much for the question. What's next? Shane Adkins for $5. Appreciate your insights. I appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Is that all we got for now? All right.
Yeah, for now.
Let's move on. So next, what we're going to do, we're going to leave Mark Smith alone. I hope everyone, I hope I've at least demonstrated at this point that as far as Mark Smith is concerned, yeah, we'll look at this here. This is what I was talking about. And we'll look at this quickly, Vishanti. But as far as Mark Smith is concerned, I don't think that the quotation that Michael pulls from his book is fairly representative of the argument that he is attempting to make. Let me know if you agree with me, because I'm interested in this. Do you guys think Michael is representing Mark Smith fairly? Do you think he's do you think the whole discussion is a little bit more nuanced than what Michael wants to say? Thanks, Simone. Simone 100% agrees with me. This is how these things work, right? So anyways, yeah. Oh, importantly, I should probably point this out. I know Chrissy doesn't think that the key is actually authentic. That's an ongoing textual argument. So in that instance, not resultative. But certainly in the text as it stands, it functions as resultative. So I wanted to show you guys this. The question came up. If you can put the slides up here, Vishanti. Michael Segal has written this really, really good book on the book of Daniel. It's called here. Let me just pull up my notes. I've got the name right here. Do I? Where is it? Where did I put it? It's not there. Oh, here. It's called Dreams, Riddles, and Visions. And on page 137 to 138, he discusses the Son of Man who appears in the Daniel's vision of the Ancient of Days, the Aramaic vision in chapter 7, verses 9 to 14. Now, he pulls up a lot of the language that appears here in chapter 7, verse 14, coincides with similar expressions elsewhere in Daniel chapter 7, verse 27, in 3, verse 31 to 33, in 4, verse 31, in 6, 26 to 27. These are all from the Aramaic portions of the book of Daniel. But look at the alignment here between all of these texts. Daniel 7:14 says, "Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him." That's speaking of the Son of Man. "All the peoples and nations of every language must serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall not be destroyed." So this is speaking of the Son of Man who is presenting himself before the Ancient of Days. And it says in Daniel's vision that the Son of Man enters the presence of the Ancient of Days riding on the clouds. Another point that Michael Segal notes makes is that this trope of the cloud rider is pretty commonly used of Yahweh throughout the biblical text, and it's drawn from a common trope that we see in other Canaanite literature where it's applied to Baal. Baal is the cloud rider. Yahweh is the cloud rider. So, turn the page here. This is the case that Michael Segal is making with regards to the Son of Man. And remember, this is a text that is written in like the 2nd century BCE. So this is super late. This is Hellenistic, guys. The phrases in common to these passages, such as this is the glory, the eternal glory of his dominion. Note the variant form, the eternal power of his kingdom. All the peoples of the nations and tongues, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. These all demonstrate their interdependence. This shared language could be the result of the activity of a single author in all 3 spots, but more likely stems from a conscious attempt to draw a connection between chapter 7 and these earlier passages. In either case, these literary allusions point toward the identification of the one like a man in the vision of Daniel 7 with the subject of the doxologies in the previous chapters. Each figure receives an eternal kingdom and dominion over all the nations of the world. The reuse of the language of the earlier chapters in relation to this figure, in addition to the use of the cloud riding motif, allows for somewhat theologically radical suggestion. You ready for it? The one, like the Son of Man, is to be identified with Yahweh himself. This is in a 2nd century vision in which the one like a man, Yahweh himself, presents himself before the throne of
anthropomorphic gods this late in my neighborhood.
Just saying, guys.
That's spicy.
All right, let's look.
Spicy.
It's spicy stuff, guys. Let's look at what's next in the video. So here, Joel has some comments about what he believes is structurally significant in okay. I think so. Play 122 to 123:08. But maybe just continue it all the way through. Actually, you know what?
Perfectly compatible with thinking that maybe that author
just go from 122:05
lines
to
even from some older polytheistic worldview. And I make an analogy constantly with Acts 17 because Paul quotes the pagan poet Aratus. In him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Was Paul intending to teach pantheism, Stoic pantheism? No. He's taking lines and he's reinterpreting them in clearly a Christian understanding. The author of Deuteronomy could have been doing something very similar. Hey, we know there's this theological view that the high God divided the nations up. Well, guess what? That's actually Yahweh, and he has kept us for himself. So I think Mark Smith is right on that. It doesn't say that Yahweh is a son of El. This is an inference, and I don't think the composer even intended to give that picture, even if he's inheriting some older ideas. I think people read way too much into that brief passage there.
Okay, pause it there for a second. Pause it there for a second, okay?
We literally just read pages of Mark Smith not saying that.
Yes, we literally did read pages of Mark Smith saying that. And importantly, guys, one of the reasons why Mark Smith is making the arguments he's making is because he's reading Deuteronomy 32, 8-9 in conversation with Psalm 82, in conversation with Psalm 89, in conversation with Numbers, chapter 23 and 24. There is clearly this, what he calls the national worldview, at work in the background. And this is not this is not Israel, drawing on the traditions of the surrounding nations. No, this is theirs. These are their traditions that they're drawing from. Their theology is in a process of change. But the point Mark Smith is making is that it's changing from what they used to believe about Yahweh and El. All right, continue.
Yeah. All right.
Say that Elyon gave to Yahweh Israel as his inheritance, as Yahweh's inheritance. Like you can, in the poetic parallelism, verse 8, when the Most High apportioned, verse 9, for Yahweh, that is that Most High that I spoke about,
Right.
his portion
Good
was his
point.
people. Like it's like there's nothing in there that necessitates that Yahweh is one of the sons of God, the Bnei Elohim, who are given by the Most High. Rather, you can easily, like Mark Smith said, these are interchangeable epithets for Yahweh.
They're
Pause.
only interchangeable if your theology requires it.
Exactly. And
if you're
he's
uncomfortable with henotheism or maybe monolatry, then you're not going to want these to refer to separate deities.
exactly. And while I think yes, Joel is right that it doesn't necessitate these things, but the implication is strong. Like it's what did I
Yeah.
say? It's glaring. Okay?
I mean, if we didn't have the alternate textual readings from like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other sources that say, oh, he apportioned them according to the B'nai Elohim, we wouldn't have this conversation like we're having it. But because we have those
Exactly.
alternate older readings, you can see where later scribes were uncomfortable with the idea of, oh,
Yes.
B'nai Elohim, oh, no, this isn't going to
Obviously,
work.
right?
That's not
Yes.
cool. Let's massage this a little bit. And that's, that's one of the things that like I've learned over the last few years listening to all the scholarship and doing my own reading in that is people become uncomfortable with certain things from older traditions and tend to massage it away. And then people not knowing that history just assume this is the way it's always been and this is the way we've always read it. And it's like, no.
Hey, have you ever heard of this
No.
guy? You heard
Who?
of him?
No.
Sam Shamoon.
No idea. Who is that?
Well, I've seen him kicking around on YouTube. I've watched a little bit of his stuff, but is he real?
Be a scholar?
Maybe you could deliver a message to Sam Shamoon from me. Sam Shamoon, you should probably read a fucking book sometime.
Okay.
All right. Let's continue.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I agree. I think too much is being made of it there. I'd have to go back and check the Smith citation, the citation you just gave. I haven't read through that, but so I can't yes or no that. But from my own reading of this text, I think it's an overreading, and it's also an opaque text. It's also difficult to exactly get at it, like some of the grammatical features, which I won't get into right now. I'm just looking at it. It's like it's confusing text. So I get why people take different interpretive options on it.
Yeah,
you always need to, in my opinion, just leave open room. Like no one's saying people are dumb for taking a different view on this. There are really great scholars who do, but it is an opaque text, or at least maybe opaque is too strong. It's not clear. It's difficult, and so it's okay. It's okay to take different options on this one, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a good point with the parallelism. The parallelism lines Yahweh up with the Most High, and I think people overlook that point. The other thing is Jonas Greenberg did some stuff.
Pause
I
it there.
shared this in my
Pause
video.
it there.
Yeah, this
okay?
is going into the
So
next.
there's a couple of things going on here. I don't know if you caught it, but Joel suggested that there's actually a parallelism at work within verses 8 to 9, whereby Elyon and Yahweh are part of opposite, or they're part of parallel pairs, which is a way in which Hebrew poetry is written. Biblical Hebrew poetry functions on something called parallelism. We'll talk about that in a minute. I got to clear my throat for a second. Sorry. But then he also says something I think that's really important. Now, first of all, I have to point this out, and in my conversations and my private conversations with Joel, he made it clear to me several times. He came into the stream cold. He did no preparation. He has not read Mark Smith's God in Translation. He was just responding off the cuff based on what he's seeing and the bits that he knows about this text without ever really looking deeply into it. He's just responding to things that Michael is telling him. I think it's important that you caught, he said, I haven't read Mark Smith. I haven't looked at your usage of this citation, so I can't say Joel's saying, I don't know. He's saying, I don't know. I have to go back and look at Mark Smith to make sure that
Yeah.
this is exactly what he's
I
saying.
I
And
might bring this up in our group chat, but maybe reconsider doing some of these streams off the cuff. Maybe just pause and
Maybe.
think, like, hey, at least
But listen,
get topic and some of the references first, just in case. Like, you can do like a little bit of prep, because it really sucks when you're on the back foot and then people are calling you out when it's like, crap, I was just doing this off the cuff, and you maybe you misremembered something or you weren't clear. You just were like, oh snap, I should have prepped first. It really sucks to be in that position. So maybe.
So and honestly, I don't know. Like, I mean, I do impromptu streams from time to time. I've come on and just someone's given me a topic and I've shown up, without much preparation or notice. So I kind of get it, right? I kind of get it, but I you do have to be careful with who you're dealing with. And but I do also want to say thank you to Joel for also trying to point out that this position is not a majority position, the one that Michael is espousing, that there are brilliant scholars out there who think very, very differently about this text than Michael does. And then I also want to point out
we've
that
read
Michael,
one, even though Michael
Yeah.
doesn't seem to get that.
I also want to point out that Michael just brushed all that aside and then got really excited about this. What we see on the screen here. Joel has suggested that the structure of this ancient poem actually lends itself to the interpretation of Yahweh as the same figure as Elyon. And when he talked about it being the two, Elyon and Yahweh, being part of poetic parallels, I questioned him on this right away, and he very
I was gonna say, didn't you do a whole video on this, actually?
A whole what?
A whole video on this supposed chiasm. It used to be like maybe
I
A
haven't.
B A B or whatever you
I
showed that
haven't.
it. Somebody did.
So I've done other videos on chiasms before, and if you've watched enough of my material, you'll probably get the sense that whenever anybody says the word chiasm, my first instinct is to roll my eyes. Joel didn't say.
Okay, I wasn't talking about the chiasm. I was saying,
okay.
like, this verse specifically, you've showed, hey, it used to say B'nai Elohim.
Yep.
And it was adjusted to fit a different poetic structure.
That's actually I do
Is that
the
a different
poetics.
verse?
It's a different verse in Deuteronomy 32. So that's it's verse.
I was like,
it's
same
the
chapter,
last,
new verse.
It's the last verse. Yeah, same chapter.
I will say though, I
verse.
do love a good chiastic structure.
I do. I love a good one, but sadly, I just don't think there are many, Vish. They're hard to come by. I think most of the time, scholars are inventing chiasms when they look at texts. I think that's what's happening here. Notice Joel didn't say it was a chiasm in his comments to Michael. He said that these were part of parallel poetic pairs. I suppose that's maybe technically true. And yes, thank you, Chrissy H. 9 times out of 10, these are scholarly hallucinations. They absolutely are.
I will absolutely use them in my devotional practice, though.
There you go. You do that. And yes, you could do some pretty cool creative things with them, right? But I just don't think most of the time they're just not there. I think that's what's happening here. So here is the way that Joel has chosen to structure this passage. So he's got an ABCBA structure where A and B are matched parallels. C is a hinge line. And so in the translation, he's got, when the Most High apportioned the nations, disinherited peoples is the subject. At his dividing up of the sons of mankind, disinherited peoples continues the subject. He fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of God. This is the hinge, fixing borders. For Yahweh's portion was his people. So here we have inheriting peoples, which is opposite of disinheriting peoples. Jacob, the share of his inheritance. The repetition of inheriting peoples, which stands opposite disinheriting peoples. One thing I want to point out here is that the words used, what's happening in A and B is not disinheriting. I mean, there's words for that in Hebrew. There is a perfectly good word for disinheriting in Hebrew. It's yarash. That's not the word that occurs here. It's the same word that is used for Elion's activity as is used to describe Jacob as the share of Yahweh's
Yeah, I
inheritance.
was going to say,
It's the
if
same
you're
word.
apportioning the nations, you're dividing it out between people. You're not
Yes.
disinheriting anybody.
Yes.
You're giving stuff.
When I pass away and my wife passes away and our estate is divided up between our children, none of our children are being disinherited. Okay? That's important, but there's more to this. Let's read what Joel has to say about this. There is a parallelism in the repetition of lines related to disinheriting, inheriting further. A begins with and a comma ends with, I don't know what those are supposed to be called. I'm terribly unsophisticated. Ends with
What? Oh, it's A prime.
Thank you.
A prime, B prime.
Thank you. All right.
I
A and
made
A
very
prime.
good grades in English lit. Thank you.
A begins with and A prime ends with the root nachal. So the verbal root bahanchal, this is the Hiphil infinitive construct with the prefix bet, is the first word in A. That's true. And the last word in A prime is the nominal form nachalato. So that is the noun nachla with in construct with the pronominal suffix, the third masculine singular pronominal suffix, his inheritance. So that's true. And then what does he say down here? He says, additionally, the syntax is parallel in that AB and A prime B prime both contain clauses with non-finite verb. So that's true. We have behanchel, which is a Hiphil infinitive construct. In the following line B, we have behaprido, which is another infinitive Hiphil infinitive construct. And then in both lines B prime and A prime, these are verbless clauses. Now, a verbless clause, I don't know if I would describe as a non-finite verb. I just describe it as a verbless clause. And then he notes that C is the only clause with an expressed finite verb, yotsev. Further, both Most High and Yahweh are in the same syntactic position in their respective clauses. They are both second sense unit of their clause. So here he's got Elyon, he says, is in the second position after the infinitive construct. It's implied with the suffix in the second position. Now in B with behaprido, and then in A prime, I guess he's got halek Adonai in the second position after key, with the construct being one sense unit. And then nachlato is supplied. Again, we've got the havel nachlato. So that's another construct chain. That also includes the pronominal suffix. So I think what he's getting at here is that both Elyon and Yahweh appear, when he says they are both the second sense unit of their clause, he's noting that they're like the second word, and this, I guess, works in B prime if we consider Chalek Adonai as a unit because it's in construct, or I guess if we agree with Chrissy that key is secondary, that's the secondary addition, then Yahweh would again be in the secondary position. There's problems with this. Shall we look at what some of the problems are? Let's see the next slide.
I mean, this is something Chrissy mentioned, is that there's a shift from like 3 words to sometimes 6, sometimes 4. That's a little suspicious if you want to try to make a parallelism case.
Yeah. So let's look. So this is how I've structured it. So you made it all fast.
Oh wait. Okay.
So
okay. There we go.
Can you go back to just reveal the there? Yes.
Okay, got it.
There we go. Okay. Do you see how I've arranged this? These are the pairs. And these are sense pairs, and they work phonetically as well. So you'll notice that each one is quite short. It's made only with a handful of words. When Elyon gave the nations for their inheritance, that's the first pair. Here is the parallel pair. When he separated the sons of Adam. Okay, so that is a completed pair. And we move on to the next stick. When he separated the sons of Adam, or sorry, no, he is setting the boundaries of the people. All right, it's the first pair. By the number of the sons of the gods, or by the number of the sons of God. That's the second pair. As such, the share of Yahweh is his people. That's the first one in the third line. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. So you will notice that there is a consistent flow of thought in terms of repetition and expansion of ideas from the first pair to the second pair in each line. Chrissy's right here. 3-3-3-3 in verse 8 and 4-3 in verse 9.
So this one.
Yeah, this is important. It's actually a 4: not a 3. He incorrectly parsed it. He needs to read Paul Sanders and other critical commentaries on this text. And again, I think this is because he's just doing it on the fly, right? He's just looking at it and he's kind of he's floating through. He's not thinking through it carefully enough, I don't think. But there's something else that is troubling to me here, is that when he said that Elyon and Yahweh were in the same syntactical position, I'm just like, I don't understand how you can arrive at that point, because while the verb in the first clause, when he gave as an inheritance, is an infinitive, the subject of the infinitive is Elyon. The verbless clause in the first pair of the third line is, as such, the share of Yahweh is his people. Yahweh, the verb is implied there, right? The verb is the copulative, is. And this is what Hebrew does lots of times. But the subject of the verb is not Yahweh. Okay? Because Yahweh is in construct. It's in the genitival position with Chalek. The subject of the verb is share. The share is his people. The share of Yahweh is his people. So this just doesn't work. And now let's look at what I've got next here. What I want to show you, and another part. So next, this is what's next. So, and I'm working up here, right? So these are the 3 pairs appearing just before this in verses 6 and 7, I believe. Okay. And look, the same parallel structure as I've laid it out is still working as we go up. Has not he, your father, created you? That's the first pair in that's the first part of line 1. He made you and set you up. That's the second pair in line 1. Remember the days of long ago. It's the first pair in line 2. Consider the years of distant generations. Second pair of line 2. Ask your father, and he will make known to you. First pair in line 3. Your elders, and they will tell you. The second pair in line 3. Do you see how consistent this is? Now now look at the next one, Vish. Look at this.
Mm-hmm.
If we start, so click the slide.
Are we going forward or backwards?
No, we're going forward.
Okay.
Okay, so this is reconstructed. This
Oh my God.
Damn. There we go. Okay.
Scream.
So this is what it looks like from the beginning of the poem all the way through to the end of verse 9. We've got this consistent breakdown of these pairs, except for in, I think it's verses 5 and 6. Verses 5 and 6 is a little weird. It looks like we actually have 2 sets of 3s as opposed to pairs. But look at how neat and tidy and tight this is. This is why, and this is the big problem, and this would be my challenge to Joel. If you want to make a case for the chiastic structure of verses 8 and 9, then you need to make that work within the overall structure of Deuteronomy 32. Because scholars have done this, and most of them generally agree on how to structure this text poetically in terms of their parallels, and most of them look like this. Honestly, this is how most of when you read commentaries, there are slight differences in places, but by and large, this is the structure that they tend to observe. So I'm just saying all that to say I do not buy Joel's argument about Elyon and Yahweh being part of opposite parallels. I don't think his structure, the way that he's broken that part of the poem down, I don't think it works. I think it's cumbersome. It's overly complicated. Sometimes these simple explanations are far and away the best ones. Right? Occam's razor.
This is it. This is the long and the short of it. Is Kip's interpretation that Elyon is giving Yahweh inheritance? Yes.
Yes. That is the long and the short of it. Okay. So we got a little bit more here. That's the parallel structures. Let me look at my notes and see what's left here.
While you do that, Mark Samalo is asking if I'm safe. Yes, I'm like 30 miles away, so I am not in the path of fires. The winds have mostly died down, so it's mostly just containment at this point. Several of my friends and comrades have lost their homes or had to evacuate those. So if you want resources for mutual aid, there's plenty out there. So
excellent. Okay. Bring the video back up and then play. It should be from like 1:23:46 to 1:25:30. You could just keep going from here to 1:25:30.
Yeah, let's just keep going. Yeah.
The other thing is Jonas Greenberg did some stuff. I cited this in my video, Polytheism in the Bible, which is linked below. He points out there's a lot of epithets in there that would
pause it for a second.
Case that it's already equating Yahweh.
Don't watch this video on polytheism, guys. All right, continue.
Okay.
With L. But also, people make a big deal about the word inheritance used, and they'll be like, well, inheritance implies he had to get it from someone. But Deuteronomy 4:20 uses the same Hebrew word, inheritance. And everyone agrees that's very much monotheistic. That's very much assuming Yahweh is the Most High, and yet it's also using the term inheritance there. So why does it have to?
Does everyone
Why
agree?
Does the term imply that Yahweh has to be getting an inheritance from the Most High?
Okay, that's I'm just going to say, like, when you get an inheritance, you are getting it from somebody. That's why it's called an
Exactly.
inheritance and not a gift. A gift is
Yes.
something that you did not previously own, that was not previously owned by someone else.
Yes, that's generally how the word works, and we'll talk about
Yeah.
that here in a second.
That's why in English and in Hebrew, there's two different words for those two different concepts. Inheritance is I got something that belonged to someone else.
Yep.
A gift is I received something that was not the property of someone else.
That's true.
Goodness
That's very
gracious.
true.
This is very
So,
frustrating.
but let's okay, maybe pull up the slides now, because he mentioned Deuteronomy 4:19-20 as a text that where the inheritance is used again for Yahweh, and scholars are universally agreed that this particular text provides a monotheistic picture. Now at this point I just have to bring it up again.
Univocal voice.
That's the problem
Goodness
here, guys,
gracious.
right? Michael is assuming, I think, maybe he's not, but it sure sounds like he's assuming that just because Deuteronomy 4 is doing something, it must mean that Deuteronomy 32 is doing the same thing. I'm sorry, no, that's not how this works, my guy. All right, so here's the text. When you raise your eyes to the sky and you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, the entire army of the sky, that's the Sabaoth, the host. I think it's Sabah here, though, singular. Be not seduced and bow down low to them and serve them, that Yahweh your God apportion to you. Chalak Adonai Elohecha otam. So that halak there, that is chalak, sorry, that is the verb form of the noun chelek that appeared in Deuteronomy 32. Yahweh's share, as I translated, is chalek. Here, Yahweh, your God, is apportioned to all people under the entire sky. You are the ones Yahweh took and brought out from the iron furnace, from Egypt, to be his and inherited people. La'am nachla, as of this day. All right.
Yeah.
So,
Couple things.
yes.
I want to know before Michael comes here that these two words don't indicate that El and Yahweh are syncretized. These are generalistic epithets. This is the
Canuck
table.
and Av. Yes.
So, yeah.
Very good.
We'll make that
Thank
much
you for
bigger.
that.
So there's a little table here that Chrissy sent me so that Michael can be preempted. So later on, you guys can pause the stream and take a screenshot.
There you go. So, yeah.
Second of all, Deuteronomy 420 uses inheritance in the same way, or sorry, in the normal way, and it clearly means that 420 is just editorial fatigue that didn't edit out a term, indicating Yahweh's secondary status in the pantheon.
Precisely. And that's what we're getting to now. So if you pull up the next slide, guess what I've got? I've got more information from Mark S. Smith concerning this text in Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20 that maybe Michael should read. Okay, so I'm where did I want to start on this one? Shoot. Okay, so I'm just scanning down. Yahweh for the Israelites, other gods of the nations. Shoot. The final, okay, here. I'm gonna start. It's about 5, 6 or 7 lines down. In the middle of the paragraph. The final clauses of both 4:19 and 29:25 in italics show dependence on Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. Even as they modify the wording of the passage, it is clear that these passages see a division in religious devotion, Yahweh for the Israelites and the other gods for the other nations. In the case of 4:19, it is evident that the tradition that joined 4 verses 1-31 and 4:32-40 did not put any stock in these other gods, as is clear from the larger context of Deuteronomy 4, verses 1 to 40, especially verses 35 to 39. There is no other part from him. There is no other. Apart from him, there is no other. The composer of 419 here is reusing the language of Deuteronomy 32:8, in particular, the root chalak, to apportion, to describe the divine plan of the world. While later sensibilities may be struck by the apparent resulting picture that God in effect made idols for the other nations, for which they are then condemned. The interpretational context for Deuteronomy 4:19 is more complex. The composer of Deuteronomy 4:19 was appropriating the old religious worldview or world theology in his monotheistic picture. Patrick W. Skihan and Jeffrey H. Tigay note that 419 reverses the picture in 32:8, whereas the poetic line of 32:8 assigns all the nations to the various divine beings. The prose reappropriation in 419 assigns these gods to the people. Do you see that? In Deuteronomy 32:8, the people, the nations are given to the gods. In 419, the gods, the idols, are given to the nations. In short, 419 presupposes the identification of El Elyon as the God of Israel in 32:8. If Deuteronomy 1 verses 1 to 440 plus 441 to 43 does represent additions prefixed to Deuteronomy 444 and following, note the new introduction of this verse, and assuming that 1 to 440, or at least 1 to 40, may be dated to when? The post-exilic period, as suggested by the reference to exile among the nations in 427. Then Deuteronomy 419's echo of Deuteronomy 32:8-9 may date to the post-exilic period. The same dating and worldview may be suggested for 29:25. Monotheism is already the norm for this tradition, yet the tradition at this point is still dealing with material about gods of the other nations, specifically national gods from the worldview of the monarchy. Is that clear? You see what's going on there? So just to summarize what Mark Smith is talking about, but I think it's patently obvious here. This is part of the hermeneutical development of Deuteronomy 32:8-9. This is an interpretive text on Deuteronomy 32:8-9 from a much later time period, from a much later perspective and worldview. A later writer is going a step further to protect God against translatability, to use the terms of Jan Assmann and Mark Smith, by rendering all the other gods as impotent, and then they were allotted to the nations, not the other way around. All right, let's there's three more clips to watch, so let's watch those quickly. Let's get through the rest of the super chats and then we're done. Listen to how exasperated poor Vishanti is, you guys. I'm so sorry I'm causing you pain, Vish. I don't mean to. You got the video there?
Yeah, it would help if I actually shared the correct tab.
There we go. Okay, yeah, back it up a little bit
Vish
to
is a professional.
Yes, please.
God.
Back it up to where he starts this quote here. Yeah, that's
125-ish or one. Are we?
Yeah, 125-ish.
View on this. There are really great scholars who do, but it is an opaque text, or at least maybe opaque is too strong. It's not clear. It's difficult, and so it's okay to take different options on this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with the parallelism. The parallelism lines Yahweh up with the Most High, and I think people overlook that point. The other thing is Jonas Greenberg did some stuff. I cited this in my video, Polytheism in the Bible, which is linked below. He points out there's a lot of epithets in there that would combine, make a cumulative case that it's already equating Yahweh with El. But also, people make a big deal about the word inheritance used, and they'll be like, well, inheritance implies he had to get it from someone. But Deuteronomy 4:20 uses the same Hebrew word, inheritance. And everyone agrees that's very much monotheistic. It's very much assuming Yahweh is the Most High, and yet it's also using the term inheritance there. So why does the term imply that Yahweh has to be getting an inheritance from the Most High in Deuteronomy 32? If that's not what the term
how
would
the
mean
word
in
inheritance
Deuteronomy
works.
4. I think people
It's
are
not how the
reading too
word
much into that.
inheritance
And
works.
real quick, just to put up some more slides here that I wanted to bring up. I think Alan Millard makes a really good case about this whole idea about Yahwism evolving from polytheism.
All right, let's take a quick bet. Are we going to get a Trojan source? Is he going to quote from
actually,
book that actively countermands his interpretation?
Well, I don't believe so. Actually, sorry,
Okay,
I'm wrecking
let's
it.
find out.
I'm wrecking it. But
There's not like
listen,
evidence for that. And he says whatever opinions about the date of
hold
monotheism.
on, stop it
appearing
for
in-
a second because I want to set this up. Everyone, I want you to read this quote carefully as Michael reads it to us, and I want you to think about what it's doing in this video, in this discussion.
You know what? I'm going to let this play, and I'm going to go get
Yeah,
something.
let it play.
in Israel are held, the fact remains that her faith is unique in the ancient world. No other ancient beliefs current there have affected so many people over so large part of the world for so long time. And then he says this: a unique phenomenon is awkward for historians since they have no standard way to explain or assess it. So they make strenuous attempts to fit it with a pattern of known features in the same general way. Then
Okay. So I think the argument here is that Judaism is special because it's affected lots of people for a long time.
It was so different than everything, and they're just mad because they want to make it the same. We're so special,
this is
even though
terrible.
it's definitely not Judaism they're talking about. They're talking about Christianity, which,
Yes.
y'all, it was spread by
Yeah.
the sword. Don't even lie to me.
Right. So
What in the hell?
so this source here, Alan Millard, this is from a conference that took place at Tyndale House at the University of Cambridge back in 1993. Okay. All right, but let's see what's next.
Then Millard cites Raleigh, who said, "Is indeed surprising and no easily way to be accounted for one simple evolutionary lines that Israel attained a monotheistic faith."
Pause it. That's citation needed. I mean, it's great that H.H. Rowley thought this back in 1953.
Yeah, scholarship hasn't progressed since then.
But just saying that Israel's monotheistic faith is not easily accounted for does not make it so.
That
There
is one of the claims of all time.
Ton of work on this. There's a ton of work on this. Tons.
It's almost 70 years since this came out. Yeah, I'm sure there's nothing new to say on the topic.
So thanks for those, Michael. Those were very, very helpful to your cause. So
I love that so many people who are trying to make a theological argument quote 60 and 70-year-old books, 50-year-old papers, and never try to engage with anything newer because the newer scholarship has overturned these ideas. But that's inconvenient because, well, that's not the theological point I want to make, so we're just going to pretend those don't exist. Goodness gracious.
Exactly. All right, go to play the next clip for about a minute.
So, I mean, we don't have a lot of good evidence that Israel actually evolved into a monotheistic faith. We don't really.
I mean, except for all
the
evidence that it did, right? I mean, we've been looking.
Yeah, it's fine. We just discover actual altar sites with other gods that are on them, or we discover Yahweh and his Asherah linking arms like a couple. Like,
Yeah.
nah, that's just fake. Okay.
We
Alright.
see that in the biblical
buddy.
text. All the texts we have show Yahweh is assumed to just be another name for El. He's already considered to be the high creator God. All the archaeological data is consistent with the biblical story that Yahweh revealed himself to early Israelites, and then people started to syncretize him into pantheons or with other gods or with other religious beliefs.
Hold on, pause it there for a
not
second.
gonna
I'm very curious to know what archaeological evidence Michael thinks there is which shows the syncretization, as he calls it, of Yahweh into other pantheons. Like, that is again just straight up making assertions for the archaeological data that is not there. All right, go for like what is that, 126.53? Yeah, go to 128. Keep running to 128.
Okay.
show you this evolutionary picture there. So I think people are assuming too much with the data. We don't have that picture, is what I'd argue.
Yeah, I mean that term is always slippery monotheism, right?
Yeah, well, true. Yeah,
monolatry, henotheism. Like
I hate the term monotheism.
It doesn't make sense of the ancient world because they clearly believed that other gods would be helpful to them, which means they believed the other gods existed. It's just a matter of how were they classifying them? How were they classifying Yahweh? What was Yahweh trying to get them to classify themselves? Or his.
What's the name of the guy? Was it a Moabite king or an Amorite king who went out and heard like, oh snap, Israel's coming, I gotta do something, and he went and made a sacrifice and was like, hey, if I just sacrifice a kid to my god, then I'll win this battle, and he won.
That's Misha, the king of Moab.
Misha, thank you.
You
okay,
got it.
yeah, all right.
Himself as
Right.
in relation, like these are the questions, right? To say there weren't other gods, because again, the definition of God is is different than we might often think of when we hear God in the West. In the West, right? God is really like a spiritual entity of various strengths or power or value, and so I don't like the term monotheism there.
Right. We have to unfortunately use it, but I wish it didn't exist, to be honest. But yeah, it's
Sure.
I just don't want to call them gods because I only think there's one, and I don't want to legitimize any other perspectives.
Oh, so but I mean, Joel makes a good point
over
here
yourself.
in this at this point. He makes a good point here about some of the frustrating limits of our terminology when it's applied to antiquity. So like, yes, thank you for pointing that out, Joel, and you're absolutely correct about that, right? But we're limited by what we have to work with, and we continue to struggle through ways to describe it accurately. So, but now this is kind of the last one here, just for the last 30 seconds. He's going to say some things about this word that we've talked a little bit about, nachla, inheritance.
All right.
I think Deuteronomy 32 is the best case they can use to try to argue this evolutionary hypothesis, and they read way too much into it. Like, I was talking to someone at ETS about the whole word inheritance, and he's like, I can find places throughout the Bible where someone is getting an inheritance and there's no one giving it to him. Like, it's not just Deuteronomy 4, it's in other places. So
Where's
people
that?
are reading way too much into these things. And I think that there's just too much evidence against it to even make that case.
So
Did he cite any verses?
No,
I
he
mean,
didn't,
one
but-
would be really
But
cool.
listen, he's not wrong on one level. So here, for example, yes, you can put the video down now because we're done with it.
Right. Oh, thank God.
Numerous texts do not supply a source for nachla when they're describing it, but it's always assumed. For example, Deuteronomy 18 verse 1. This is one that I just pulled up at random. The word itself occurs 222 times in the Hebrew Bible. I'm working through all of them. I've not gotten very far yet. I've just finished doing the Pentateuch. But this is what Deuteronomy 18 verse 1 says. There shall be for Levitical trees. I just about said Levitical trees. No. There shall be for Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi, no share, no inheritance with Israel. That's chelek v'nachala im Yisrael. Okay? Fire of Yahweh and its portion, there it is again, Ishe Adonai v'nachalta. Or sorry, v'nachaleto. Shall they eat, but there shall be no inheritance for him among his brothers. There it is again. V'nachala lo yehya lo bekerev echav. Yahweh, he is his inheritance. Adonai hu nachalato. I struggle with saying that one for some reason, just as he told them. So you'll notice throughout that whole section, the repetition of the word nachala, with reference to the Levites, making the point that they don't get an inheritance. They don't get an allotment like everyone else in Israel. Instead, they get to eat the sacrifices, and Yahweh says he is their inheritance. But you'll notice in this section, it never says Yahweh gave Levi this, or Yahweh didn't give Levi this inheritance. Do you see how that is? So, yeah, he's right. There's lots of places in the Bible that you can read where the giver of Nachla is not explicit, but it's always there. I mean, that's what Nachla is.
Yeah.
An inheritance is something that's received,
from another person.
As from another person. You can either give Nachla or you can receive it. Importantly, and this is kind of the point, no one gives Nachla to themselves. And no one receives Nachla from themselves. That's the point. The point is not that the giver or the recipient of that the giver of Nachla is not explicit in Deuteronomy 32, even though it is. It's Elyon. The problem is that if you're going to equate Elyon with Yahweh, this makes no sense, because you can't give Nachla to yourself and you can't receive Nachla from yourself. You want to say that Yahweh divided the nations as an inheritance and kept a portion back for himself. There's other ways to do that without using the word Nachla. That's the point. That's what makes this text so troubling and so difficult. In order to, in terms of understanding it any other way than as it reads simply, as it reads straightforwardly, that when Elyon gave the nations as an inheritance, when he divided up, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of the gods, just like in all other cultures, or in most other cultures in the Levant, where the high God divided up all the nations among the sons of the god. That's what's happening here. As a result, the share of Yahweh is his people. Jacob is his Nachla, his inheritance, that he has received from Elyon. Yeah, I've got, this is the dictionary. This is the Chalot definition of Nachla, and I'll just read the basic definition here at the top. Thank you, Nachala. Inalienable hereditary property. In the case of conquest, hereditary division of the property between an individual or the family as their share of the booty consisting of lands. That's the basic definition.
Inalienable hereditary property.
Yes.
Huh. Hereditary property. It's almost like saying sons of the gods. Uh-oh.
Kind of is. Let's finish up on the last slide. I just want to, I think it's just the text again, but I just want to hammer this home. Yeah. Ask your father and he will make it known to you, your elders, and they will tell you. When Elyon gave nations for an inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he is setting boundaries of the people by the number of the sons of God. As such, the share of Yahweh is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. We're done.
Like, hey, other nations have their gods. Israel has this one.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody seemed to think it all came from Elyon.
The
So
god that's higher above all the other ones.
the god that's above all the other ones. You know, just like in Psalm 82, where Yahweh anonymously takes a stand in the council of El to make a speech about all the other gods, right? It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Well,
It's funny how a lot of us study Greek mythology in school and then just decide nothing else works this way when that's really the way everything worked in that region. Funny that.
I think actually there's only one more super chat. If you guys have anything else before we hop off, then get them in
I
quick.
read it. There's only one from Vadim.
Yep, that one.
Not from Hangfashi, who's referencing Vadim. God, my brain is fried.
Yes, Vadim and I were joking about getting rid of gods. I remember the iron chariots of the Canaanites giving Yahweh trouble. Then T brought up Dagon and Conan. Conan always used iron against the gods. So what's the deal with iron? Well, that's interesting. I'm not. I don't know anything about Conan.
Conan the Barbarian?
Not really. I mean, I watched the movie years and
What
years
is
and
best
years
in life?
ago. Well, I know what's best. Yes, the shoot, but now my brain is all jumbled, so you're gonna have to say it because I can't remember how it goes.
Chat's gonna need to help you out. What is best in life?
What is best in life, chat? I'm such a dork. Please help me. Nobody
I cannot believe
wants
you
to
didn't at least name
respond.
one thing that's best in life.
I know the cries. Is it the cries of
the lamentation of their women?
The lamentation of your women. The blood. Is it the blood of your enemies, or the cries of your enemies? I'm sorry, I don't. I can hear Arnold Schwarzenegger saying it. I can.
To crush your enemies. Hear the cries, the lamentations of the women.
Yes. Thank you,
third part,
Vishanti.
And as they flee from before you. Yeah. Classic.
I don't think I've seen Conan for 40 years. Like seriously. Chrissy H sent us a super chat.
Oh, sweet.
Thanks, Chrissy. I want to note also Aaron Wilson Wright shows Dead Sea Scrolls scroll that uses Deuteronomy 32:8 and has B'nai Elim enclitic mem. Yeah, nice. I don't remember which one. Yeah.
To crush your enemies.
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and
the lamentation of the women. Love it. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Should have said it's outside your field of expertise.
Yeah, definitely far outside my expertise. And I just want to like I'll give it. It's been great that Chrissy's been here and active in the chat because she has done phenomenal work on this particular passage. I've benefited.
This is literally Chrissy's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've benefited a ton from a lot of what she's written. I actually guys, I was in Calgary for New Year's, and I had watched this stream while I was there, and then I had also been interacting a little bit with Joel Karitko about it. And I was so agitated by it. I actually had to. I was in the car and I had to call Chrissy, just to vent, just to
Yeah.
vent, and to talk through. I had big feelings about this one, guys. Real big feelings. So,
Yeah.
but
I mean, our group
she's
chat popped off
yeah.
with Joel Kirko.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So
and Joel, I really hope that you think that this was fair. We should talk some more about it at some point. I have no doubt that at least you and I are getting together for scotch in the near future. But I don't know. I still kind of think that we need to do some more stuff on YouTube. And yes, to answer your question,
teaching.
Joel is teaching right now. First day of school, or first class, I should say. He didn't tell me what he's teaching. I didn't ask, I'm afraid. But there's another one here from David for $1.99. What did they mean about polytheism issue? Are you talking, if you're talking about Michael and Joel? So I mean, there's a few things. Obviously, if you're a pretty conservative Christian, if you're a Christian apologist, the idea that the biblical text preserve echoes, at least, if not outright, what's the word I'm looking for? Outright expressions of polytheism, that's very problematic for someone who holds to the scriptures as the perfect word of God, or as, the revelation, the complete revelation for humankind. So that's a problem. Christian apologists must view the Bible as a monotheistic book, and it is incredibly difficult because it's just not. It's just not. There are numerous texts which show a pretty complicated relationship, as we have illustrated today, with this question of who the other gods are, what they do, and what's Yahweh's relationship to them. And now, in terms of the little bit of a rant that they went on concerning how much they don't like the term monotheism, there's an active conversation in scholarship right now about how inadequate some of these terms that we've developed are for accurately describing the ancient religions of Israel, the religions of the ancient Near East. Dan McClellan actually hosted a conference last year in which scholars gave papers discussing how basically all the way through the biblical period, including, the New Testament, through to the end of the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, there's no such thing really as monotheism. Not really. Monotheism is not is a problematic term from a scholarly perspective for describing anything that's going on in antiquity. And we're stuck with some of these categories, and it's going to take a lot of work to sort out how to fix those issues. Bible Lore Podcast. This is Hayden Tank. Also, at least Michael, claimed Yahweh doesn't consult the divine council, that he just has them for generic relations. Have they not fucking read Job? Yeah.
As Chrissy
Sure enough.
and I were discussing Job literally 2 nights ago, this is God showing up to a court situation, and Job's like, hey, you did me wrong. And the attesting witnesses are like, are you sure? Are you sure you did nothing wrong? And God shows up and goes, yeah, I did that. What are you going to do about it?
Yep.
And then he ends up paying Job restitution. So,
yeah,
you lost the court case.
He sure
Good
did.
stuff.
But the jury was stacked. So
Yeah.
I will be on the Bible Lore podcast coming soon. Thank you, Hayden Tank. I think there's a couple
clip
more
of these
that
2
trickled
Italian
in here,
guys.
right?
They're like, he was the best guy around. And they're like, but what about all the murders he did? What murder?
Yeah.
It's like the end of Job.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Lauren Peterson, thank you for the $5 super chat. How do we know the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by the Essenes? Did they ever sign the copies? And no, we don't know. And this is also an ongoing discussion. We have a strong inkling, a very good educated guess among scholars that the Essenes, or I should say that the group who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls were a group of Essenes. They're, as early Judaism is complicated, we have a tendency to think that not all Essene communities looked identical to one another, just as not all any religious communities anywhere. All of them have some pretty interesting differences. Some of them really minor, some of them so significant people can't even get along. This is sort of how religion works. There is no the word itself, Essene, the Hebrew form of it does not appear in any of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some have suggested that the word Hasidim, which also appears in the book of Daniel, and is used extensively in Qumran, is their self-identifier. That's the word that they use to identify themselves. Also, the Yachad, which just means the community or the congregation. But the relationship between Hasidim especially and the word Essene it's something that scholars continue to discuss. The reason scholars think that the Essenes wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls is because among a huge number of the texts, what we have identified as the so-called sectarian scrolls. So these are the ones which seem to promote the same sort of theology and worldview, are also the ones that seem to promote the same sort of rules and ideals with regards to communal living and ritual practice that align with what's there at the site of Qumran. And many of the things that are written in these sectarian texts also align with descriptions of the Essenes offered to us by Josephus and by Philo. So while we don't know that the people who wrote the scrolls were Essenes, we think they probably were, or at least very, very closely related to them. And if they did sign copies, they used different words to identify themselves. Thank you very much for the super chat. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then the last one.
My running theory is, having read through like Second Esdras and at least half of the Maccabees, because there's 4 of them, is that I'm getting very strong vibes that the Qumran community saw the Hasmonean crap and were like, we are not fooling around with this nonsense. We are out of here. We're going to go start our own community, and it's going to be like super pure and not corrupt and not tainted and not politically leashed. Screw you guys.
Just terribly, terribly prone to dysentery. That's all. So,
yeah.
Oops. So, yeah. But no, that's absolutely correct. Vish, the text that I actually wrote my PhD dissertation on, the Apocryphon of Jeremiah, I think very interestingly in one section appear to describe in very unflattering terms the first of the Hasmonean priests, and it calls them, actually, it's kind of interesting, it calls them an order or a kind of priests, using that word mean that we know from Genesis chapter 1. You know how things are created after their own kinds. It's employed here in a way in which we've not really seen it before, to apply to these Hasmonean priests. So, but that's fun. There's one more member chat from Matthew Karub. If we can pull that up, I'll do it. Matthew Karub, who has been a member for 8 months, which that's an eternity in my world. Thank you so much. I enjoy your streams as always, my friend. Much love. I must ask you to keep your geese, though.
Okay.
I don't know what that means.
Chrissy's not convinced the Qumran community were Essenes. I think it's based too much on the idea that we just trust Josephus. Like, yeah, I appreciate Josephus. He gives a lot of context, but also he's not an unbiased source. So there's definitely a difference between the way people identify themselves and think of themselves in relation to other groups versus someone who's not in that group discussing them.
Exactly.
So,
and I think and I think I would tend to agree with Chrissy. For the sake of simplicity, we usually talk about the Qumran community as Essenes, but you're right. Like, well, I will say it this way: when Josephus is describing the Essenes, in the first place, I also think we have to be very suspicious about this description and how accurate on point it is. He's looking also at one segment, I think, of one community or maybe a couple of communities of this group that he's, putting together. So he's probably got a pretty flat perspective of the Essenes and what they thought and what they did and who
he probably
they were.
didn't directly interact with them.
No,
I don't
he probably
think they
didn't
would have
directly
anything to do
interact
with him.
Likely not. But I think when it comes to the writers and the collectors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they probably belong to, in broad terms, whatever that group was, or those groups were that Josephus was describing as Essenes, even if they weren't necessarily part of the same group. They were similar, and closely related. Oh, look, Apologia showed up. IP is never wrong, so I assume that was just the first 5 minutes or so, and the rest is just hangout. Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely, that's what we do. This was really, really long, and I always feel like I'm apologizing for the length of my streams, but listen, here's the thing, okay? It takes a long time to work through some of this stuff to my satisfaction, at least. I warned you ahead of time. This is a really, really complicated topic, and you can't. I mean, I guess somebody who's got stronger teaching chops than I do could knock this out in maybe 30 minutes or an hour, but I don't know. There's a lot here that I really felt strongly about ensuring I was communicating clearly to everyone.
It's also the bullshit asymmetry principle, which is why debunking videos are like 3 to 4 times longer than the person spewing a claim.
Right.
So that's also part of it.
And
but you can tell my brain starts to melt down after like 2.5 hours. It's just like fajitas sizzling in here. So
and you know exactly if Michael decides to pick this up, you know exactly the first thing he's gonna say is 3.5 hours. Wow, what a bunch of us obsessed maniacs for 3.5 hours. So
watch it on 2x speed. That's what it's there for.
What are you gonna do?
Plus, all the sources are on the screen. You can just pause it, screenshot, and move on.
You can do that.
Whatever.
You can do all that. All right.
Anyway.
We gotta go though. What's going on, Vishanti? What's coming up? Anything?
My Hebrew classes just started back up with Dr. Josh. I'm going into a Shomer Shalom ordination program with Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb. So that's going to be taking up the next, I don't know how many years of my life. I'm really excited about. And yeah, my studies continue apace and I continue to remain behind on my channel. But hopefully I will be able to resolve some of that.
Your channel is linked in the description. So
there's not really anything there yet, so I don't really care if people are subscribing.
And you've got a Vish list, and I think you have links on your channel as well for places where people can go and support you. and you and I are going to go hang out with Dapper Dinosaur again on Saturday.
On Saturday.
To continue the long slog through Bodhi Hodge's book about the Tower of Babel. So watch for it, guys. Watch for it. Who did Dr. K say was
the
stacked?
jury was stacked.
Oh,
It wasn't a person. The
yeah.
jury was stacked against.
But listen, we all know that Wes Huff is stacked, right? He's pretty buff, guys. Those t-shirts are pretty tight. But that's all I'm going to say about that. I will probably be doing the next live stream that I do. I'll probably have to sit down and look at that discussion that Wes had with Joe Rogan, because he made a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of problematic things that he said in there. I'm all about setting the record straight and correcting bad biblical scholarship, you guys. And oh yes, I'll also say Josh and I will be back next week, next Thursday.
Oh yeah, for Kiryat Brit.
To continue in Kiryat Brit, where we're reading the story of Balaam, which is very apropos.
Hey, very
right?
timely.
It's very timely. Yeah. And then I've got the second part of my child sacrifice conversation that I had with Heath Jarrell and Dan McClellan. That is going to be made public in the course of the next couple of weeks. And at the same time, I will be publishing on my Patreon for early release the interview that Dr. Josh and I had with the great Israeli archaeologist Amahai Mazar, all about the land of Canaan at the time of the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. It's awesome. It's about 45 minutes. I'm really excited about it. I've been sitting on it for a while, but it's going to be going up on my Patreon in the next couple of weeks. So if you want an early peek at that, you know where to go. All right. I think that's it for all of us. Thank you so much, everyone, once again for coming out. Thank you for your ongoing support, and thank you for putting up with my terrible PowerPoints and my horribly long presentations. Have a great night.